My name is Catherine. I'm 34 years old, and I've been staying with my mom at our family house ever since my dad died 3 years ago. I decided to stay because I didn't want to leave my mom alone. So I've been here for 3 years now. During this time, some really bad people came to see us. These people were my own brother, Bob, and his wife Jane. I've known Bob since he was born, and Jane has been his girlfriend since they were in middle school. Bob used to bring Jane home during vacations, so I got to know her too. To be honest, I can't forget about those two. They used to bully me just for fun. Both of my parents were usually busy with work, so they weren't around much on weekends. But when they were gone, that's when the bad stuff happened. We lived in a big mansion that my dad, who was a CEO, built for us. But one time, they told me to play hide and seek in the mansion, and when I hid in a closet, my brother and Jane filled it with stuff, trapping me inside. I'd be stuck in there until just before my parents came home, and then my mom would scold me for messing up the closet. One day, my mom came home early from work and caught Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was really mad. After that, they never locked me in the closet again, but they kept bothering me. I was angry at my parents for not being there when I needed them. I resented Bob and Jane, but I also felt mad at my parents for not helping me. Then, when I was in middle school, Bob and Jane did something really mean. They cut up my school uniform with scissors, wrote all over my textbooks, and even ruined my cushions and bedding. I found out later that Bob and Jane were in high school at the time, and they were angry because they got bad grades on their exams and their parents scolded them. That's probably why they took such a mean revenge on me. I was shocked in my messed up room. Why was this happening to me? Why wouldn't anyone help me? I stood there lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to dinner, my mom came to check on me and saw my room. She screamed, and my dad came running too. My brother came in last, struggling to hold back his laughter. He couldn't help but chuckle sometimes. Surprised, my parents looked at me as I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." Tears started flowing as soon as I spoke. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. They've ruined my toys, my school stuff, and my clothes. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm mad at both of you, Dad and Mom. You haven't helped me. It was probably the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Before that, I just quietly endured and cried alone when things were tough. But this time, I cried loudly like a child. Seeing me like that, my mom hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything." Even my brother, after seeing how upset I was, seemed to understand how serious it was. He tried to leave, but my dad stopped him. "Do you understand what you've done? This is serious," my father said. Even though he wasn't yelling, his voice was scary, even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Come on, Dad. It's not like we committed a crime. We were just having some fun," my brother replied. "Destruction of property is a crime. You need to understand that you have to make up for it," my father explained. But Catherine is family, and I'm still young. Minors can't be criminals, can they? My brother protested. My father sighed deeply at my brother's excuse. True, as a minor, you might not have the means to pay. But as parents, we're responsible for your actions. If you can't compensate, we'll have to. It's time for you to go live with your uncle. Uncle? My father's younger brother was known for being strict and disliked dishonesty. He was like a scary figure to the neighborhood kids, similar to a boogeyman. While he was nice to well-behaved children like me, he had no patience for troublemakers like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along with him. "No, I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I'll behave better," my brother begged. "I've heard that promise too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet, when you two chased her around, when you threw bugs at her even though you knew she was scared, every time we found out, we scolded you and you always promised to stop. But you kept doing it anyway. We can't have someone in our home who hurts our family, even if they're family themselves. You're not welcome here anymore," my father declared. After my father's declaration, he grabbed Bob by the neck and took him away. Later on, I learned that my parents were really upset with Bob's behavior. Even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to get why he was in trouble. He just kept bothering me. I figured he was beyond help. Some people just don't understand how to behave in society. I learned that from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to university using our father's money after high school. But our father didn't think he'd do well there. He said, You'll just cause trouble for others. So Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after high school, but he seemed desperate to leave. As soon as he graduated, he and Jane rented an apartment together. They decided to live together without any help from our parents or uncle for rent or expenses. Later on, Bob asked me to lend him some money, even though I was just starting high school and didn't have a job. All the money I had saved up before, which Bob used to steal when he lived with us, was given back to me by my parents. I kept track of it in a notebook. So, I did have money saved, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I told Bob, "Aren't you embarrassed to ask your high school sister for money? I don't even have a job, so I don't have extra money to give you." After that, I told my parents about Bob's request, and they were angry. They'd promised not to help him anymore. I thought Bob and Jane should learn to live on their own without relying on others. From then on, I focused on my studies. I worked hard and went to college. After graduating, I got a job and continued learning new things. I was so busy with my own life that I forgot all about Bob. As I had forgotten about him, an invitation to Bob's wedding arrived at our house. The bride was Jane, of course, his partner. So they're finally tying the knot. I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should go to the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He had always been frail, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so my mother and I panicked and called for help. During this crisis, I reached out to my brother, but he brushed me off, saying, "I'm getting married soon. Don't bother me during this important time." Even when I told him our father was urgently hospitalized, he dismissed it, saying, "He just tripped, right? Make sure you come to my wedding." Then he hung up. Sadly, our father passed away shortly after. With the funeral arrangements underway, my mother and I informed my brother that we couldn't attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we should be there, my mother and I decided not to go. We also let Jane's parents know about our father's passing and our inability to attend. While Jane's parents understood, my brother and Jane accused us of disrespect for not attending. The message my mother and I received on our voicemail accusing us of rudeness was so absurd that it made me wonder who the real rude person was. While we were focused on arranging our father's funeral, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without considering our loss. After that, my mother and I never brought it up, but we felt like our relationship with my brother was completely broken. Then, out of nowhere, my brother showed up at our door. When I answered the intercom and he said he had a delivery, I wasn't expecting him to be there in person. When I opened the door, there he was, along with Jane, carrying large suitcases. They'd pushed past me and barged into the house. "Hey, hold on, what's going on?" I protested. It seemed like my brother had forgotten our father's words, who had told him never to come back to our house. Despite that, they both barged in, dropped their luggage in the hallway, and started talking nonsense to me. "You and Mom need to leave this house right now," my brother demanded. "What? Mom has dementia, remember?" I was stunned. What was my brother talking about? It had been 3 years since our father passed away, and he hadn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything to make amends. And now, he was asking for our family mansion. On top of that, he was assuming our mother had dementia and planning to kick her out. I was left speechless. Then our mother appeared from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's happening?" As she saw my brother, she said something shocking. "Oh, who are you?" "If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. My brother and Jane laughed at her. "See, this happens every time we see her. Her dementia must be getting worse. You take care of Mom. I'll take the mansion. I'm the oldest son, so I should get it," my brother declared as he walked further into the house. Jane, copying my brother, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and go. I never want to see you again." I hurried to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you all right?" We felt like we were being pushed out, so we left the mansion, leaving all the old furniture behind. My mother and I gathered our things and left the house. Luckily, a friend of mine who heard about our situation offered us his house. He was overseas and couldn't take care of it himself. Originally, his cousin looked after the house, but since he's moving to another state next year, it seemed like a good opportunity for us. When we arrived at the house and unpacked, my mother and I finally felt relieved. Then my mother chuckled and said, "We've left that house, but I still don't like how Bob and Jane behave. Maybe we should sell the house," she suggested. I asked my mother about what Bob said regarding her having dementia. She explained, "That's just a story they made up. About 2 years ago they started asking me for money all the time, but they didn't even attend their father's funeral. And they never bothered to check on me afterward." I couldn't believe their audacity to ask for money after all they'd done, so every time they asked, I pretended not to know them and said, "Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right?" "Oh, I understand now," I remarked. It seemed Bob and Jane misinterpreted my mother's deliberate distance and treated her like a stranger because she wanted nothing to do with them anymore. They thought her indifference meant she genuinely didn't remember them, leading them to believe she had dementia. Regardless, I believed it was wrong to kick someone out of their home, especially if they thought they had dementia. My mother quickly decided to sell the mansion. We'd have been discussing selling it ever since my father passed away, as it was too big for just the two of us. At that time, an executive from my father's company, where I was being trained as a successor, expressed interest in buying it. So the buyer was almost certain. We just needed to go through the paperwork. When I spoke to a real estate contact and explained the situation to the executive, they agreed that leaving the mansion with Bob and Jane would lead to serious problems. It was clear that action needed to be taken swiftly. A week later, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Bob called my mother while Jane called me repeatedly. They probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes and just enjoy our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us realizing it, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered Jane's call, she exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer sooner? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over." "Wait, didn't you two take over the house?" "I think it says who should be saying that we've been taken over," I retorted. "No, Bob and I were living in this mansion, but now some strangers have shown up and are demanding that we leave. They just barged in and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over," she exclaimed. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to remind her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about being taken over, but you're not even the legal owners. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to someone else. So strangers who have no connection to the property should quickly move out." "What? She sold it? This mansion?" She sounded shocked. "But this mansion belongs to Bob," she protested. "When did anyone ever say that?" I questioned. "Well, no one explicitly said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't it natural for him to eventually inherit this house, the property, and his dad's company? And I'll be living as the elegant wife of the CEO in this mansion," Jane argued. Despite her confidence, Jane seemed panicked. I couldn't help but burst out laughing again. The fact that she assumed Bob would automatically inherit the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father ran was astonishing. Such naive thinking, I thought to myself. Given Jane's strong belief, Bob probably also thought he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Once more, I couldn't help but laugh at Jane's words. "Bob is the boss, and you're his wife? How can you even think that's possible? You both started at the company without any special training or education to run it," I chuckled. Jane seemed surprised by my teasing. She shot back, "Well, I might inherit the company from my uncle then." I laughed even harder. "You should check the company news first. And about my uncle's business, his cousin's son is already running it." "What? So Bob can't be CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife?" Jane couldn't believe it. "That's right. Can I hang up now?" "I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore," I said. "Please, Catherine, wait. Can you give us some money?" Jane pleaded. I hung up the call, but later I heard what happened next from Uncle. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion. They clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It turns out, since they were hired by Uncle's company, they were undergoing strict training, and they were so scared that they cried when Uncle took them away. They were taken to a mountain retreat owned by one of Uncle's friends because they were too unpredictable on their own. Uncle warned them that if they didn't behave at the retreat, they'd be stuck there forever. Despite this, they tried to escape multiple times but got caught every time. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to manage the house was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm living in his parents' house now. He's planning to come back home this year, so we'll start planning our wedding soon. My mother and uncle who helped us will be invited to the wedding, but Bob and Jane won't be invited.
I can't take this anymore. Brett's voice cut through the tense silence, his face contorted with rage. Why the hell should I listen to you? My heart sank as I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. What was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner had quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Tessa, my stepdaughter, shot me an apologetic glance before turning to her fiancé. Brett, please, this is my family. Family? He scoffed, glaring at me with utter contempt. She's nothing but an outsider who wormed her way into our lives. The insult stung like a slap to the face. Anger and hurt swirled within me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I've been part of this family for over 15 years. Show some respect. Respect? Brett let out a derisive laugh. You don't deserve an ounce of it. Aaron, my husband, finally spoke up. That's enough, Brett. You've gone too far. But Brett wasn't done. He turned his venomous gaze toward Harper, my younger stepdaughter. And you're just her little lapdog, aren't you? Blindly following her lead. Harper's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you talk to us like that? I'll talk however I want, Brett sneered. This is my family now, and I won't have some stepmother and her pet trying to control us. That was the final straw. I slammed my fist on the table, causing the dishes to rattle. Get out of my house, you ungrateful bastard. Chaos erupted as Tessa tried to calm Brett, while Aaron attempted to reason with me. Harper stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. I glared at Brett, every fiber of my being seething with rage. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. As the argument raged on, I knew there was no going back. The insults, the disrespect, it was unforgivable. In that moment, a part of me died, replaced by a burning desire for revenge. Little did Brett know, he had awoken a force he could never comprehend. A mother's wrath. I should have seen the cracks forming years ago, but I was blinded by love and the hope of creating a complete family. It all started when I met Aaron at the office holiday party. He was a divorced father of 2 girls, Tessa and Harper, struggling to balance work and parenthood. I was instantly drawn to his warmth and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his daughters. 6 months later, we were married, and I found myself thrust into the role of a stepmother. Harper, the youngest, embraced me with open arms. But Tessa, already a rebellious teenager, kept her distance. She's not my real mom, she'd mutter under her breath whenever I tried to connect with her. Aaron brushed it off as a phase, but I could see the resentment growing in Tessa's eyes with each passing year. Give her time, he'd say with a reassuring smile. She'll come around. But she never did. The battles became more frequent, over curfews, boyfriends, and eventually her choice of college. Tessa made it clear that I had no say in her life. Stay out of it, Yolanda, she'd snap, her voice dripping with venom. You're not my mother. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart. I tried everything to build a bond with her, but she shut me out at every turn. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I broke down in front of Aaron. She hates me, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. No matter what I do, she'll never accept me. Aaron pulled me close, his embrace offering little comfort. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I'll talk to her. We'll sort this out. But we never did. The years passed, and the chasm between Tessa and me only grew wider. Harper remained my lifeline, the one person in the family who truly understood me. Don't give up on her, Harper would say, her eyes filled with sadness. Deep down, she knows you love her. But Tessa's hatred had taken root, festering like an open wound. And when she brought Brett into our lives, everything changed. The first time I met him, alarm bells went off in my head. There was an arrogance about him, a sense of entitlement that set my teeth on edge. So you're the stepmother, he'd said, his voice laced with disdain. I forced a smile, determined to make a good impression. It's nice to meet you, Brett. I've heard so much about you. He simply sneered and turned away, leaving me standing there like a fool. From that moment on, Brett became the catalyst that tore our family apart. He fueled Tessa's resentment, whispering poisonous words into her ear, turning her against me and Harper. And now, after that fateful dinner, the bonds that once held us together had been shattered beyond repair. As I lay awake that night, anger burned within me like a raging fire. Brett had crossed a line, and I knew there would be no turning back. It was time to make him pay. Tessa's announcement of her engagement should have been a joyous occasion, a chance for our family to mend the fractures that had formed over the years. But deep down, I knew better. "I want you all to be a part of this," Tessa had said, her eyes shining with hope as she clutched Brett's hand. Harper beamed at her sister, genuinely happy for her. But I couldn't shake the sense of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. "Of course, we'll be there," Erin promised, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "This is a celebration for all of us." I forced a smile, determined to make the best of the situation. Maybe this was the olive branch Tessa and I needed to finally put the past behind us. That naive optimism was shattered a month later at the engagement party. The evening started off pleasantly enough, with family and friends gathering to toast the happy couple. But as the drinks flowed, Brett's true colors began to show. "To Tessa and me," he announced, raising his glass with a smug grin. "The future, Mr. and Mrs. Keaton, starting a new chapter in our lives without any unnecessary baggage." His eyes locked onto mine, the implication clear. Harper must have sensed the tension because she quickly intervened. "Aw, come on, Brett. We're all family here." "Family?" He let out a derisive laugh. "Don't kid yourself, Harper. Once Tessa and I are married, we'll be cutting ties with all the dead weight." A hush fell over the room as everyone processed his words. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Aaron stepped forward, his voice strained. "Brett, I think you've had too much to drink. Let's take a break." But Brett wasn't done. He turned his venomous gaze toward me, his words slurring with each insult. "You're nothing but a parasite, leeching off my soon-to-be wife's family. Well, let me make one thing clear. You and your little lapdog over there have no place in our lives." That was it, the final straw. Before I could stop myself, I hurled my glass at him, the contents splattering across his smug face. Pandemonium erupted as guests scattered, screaming and shouting. Aaron tried to restrain me, but I was beyond reason. "You miserable piece of trash!" I screamed, struggling against my husband's grip. "How dare you speak to us like that?" Harper rushed to my side, her eyes blazing with fury. "Let's get out of here," she hissed, grabbing my arm. As we stormed out, I caught a glimpse of Tessa's devastated expression. But in that moment, I didn't care. Brett had crossed a line, and there was no going back. We spent the night at my sister Lynette's, Harper doing her best to console me as I raged about Brett's insults. "He's a monster," I spat, pacing back and forth, "and Tessa is too blind to see it." Lynette watched us with a pensive expression, her gaze filled with concern. "You know what you have to do, right?" I froze, meeting her eyes. A silent understanding passed between us. It was time to fight fire with fire, and Brett was about to get burned. In the days following the disastrous engagement party, a dark cloud of anger and resentment hung over me. Brett's vicious words echoed in my mind, fueling the flames of revenge that burned within. Aaron tried to reason with me, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. "Sweetheart, think about what you're doing. This isn't the way to handle things." I whirled on him, my eyes blazing. "And what would you have me do? Sit back and let that bastard disrespect us like that?" He recoiled at the venom in my voice, but I was past the point of caring. Brett had awoken a fury in me that could not be extinguished. Harper remained my steadfast ally, her unwavering support a lifeline in the storm. "Don't listen to Dad," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll make Brett pay for what he did." Her words were like balm to my wounded soul. At least someone understood the depths of my pain. It was then that Lynette dropped a bombshell. She had connections that could expose the skeletons in Brett's closet. "The guy's been cooking the books at his company for years," she revealed, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Embezzlement, fraud, you name it." A wicked grin spread across my face. "Perfect. It's time we brought that scumbag down a few pegs." Harper's eyes widened, but she didn't protest. Instead, a matching grin tugged at her lips. Over the next few weeks, Lynette fed us information about Brett's shady business dealings. The more we uncovered, the more my hatred for him grew. Aaron, oblivious to our machinations, continued his efforts to reconcile. "Tessa's devastated," he'd say, his brow furrowed with worry. "She needs her family right now." I scoffed at his words. "She made her choice when she decided to marry that piece of trash. Don't expect me to feel sorry for her." The rift between us deepened, with Aaron growing increasingly frustrated with my stubbornness. But I didn't care. My sole focus was on making Brett pay. As the wedding date loomed closer, The tension in our household became palpable. Tessa's phone calls grew more desperate, pleading with us to attend the ceremony and support her. "Please, Mom," she'd beg, her voice thick with tears. "I need you there." The use of that word, Mom, sent a pang through my heart, but the wound Brett had inflicted was too raw, the betrayal too deep. "I'm sorry, Tessa," I'd reply, my voice devoid of emotion. "But I can't be there for you this time." Harper remained steadfastly by my side, her loyalty unwavering. "Don't let her guilt you," she'd say, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "We're in this together." And together we would strike, unleashing a storm of retribution that would leave Brett's world in ruins. As the wedding day drew near, the calm before the storm settled over us, but I could feel the electricity crackling in the air, the promise of vengeance waiting to be unleashed. Brett had no idea what was coming for him. The days ticked by with agonizing slowness as Tessa's wedding drew near. Each time the phone rang, I steeled myself for another round of pleading and guilt-tripping. "Mom, please," Tessa would beg, her voice thick with desperation. "I need you there. It wouldn't be the same without you." I could hear the tears in her words, but my resolve remained unshaken. "I'm sorry, Tessa, but you made your choice when you decided to marry that monster." Harper would squeeze my hand, a silent show of support as I delivered those harsh words. She understood the depths of my pain, the utter betrayal I felt at Brett's hands. Aaron, ever the peacemaker, tried in vain to reason with me. "Sweetheart, this is tearing our family apart. Can't you see how much this is hurting Tessa?" I rounded on him, my eyes blazing with fury. "And what about how much Brett has hurt us? Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for standing up to that piece of trash." He recoiled at the venom in my voice, utterly helpless in the face of my wrath. Lynette, bless her soul, remained my steadfast ally. "Don't let them get to you," she'd say, her voice low and conspiratorial. "We've got the goods on Brett, and it's time to make him pay." With her help, we compiled a dossier of evidence, financial records, emails, and witness testimonies that painted a damning picture of Brett's illegal activities. Embezzlement, fraud, insider trading, the list went on and on. As the wedding day drew closer, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. The storm was gathering, and Brett had no idea what was about to hit him. The night before the ceremony, I sat alone in the darkness, clutching the damning evidence in my hands. Memories of Brett's insults, his utter disrespect, flooded my mind, stoking the flames of vengeance that burned within. This wasn't just about teaching him a lesson. It was about protecting Harper, ensuring that she never had to endure the pain and rejection I had suffered at his hands. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Harper slipped into the room, her eyes shining with determination. "It's time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, rising to my feet. Together we marched into the night, the weight of our mission heavy on our shoulders. As the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, the authorities were already in motion, armed with the evidence we had provided. Brett's world was about to come crashing down around him. The morning of Tessa's wedding dawned bright and clear, a cruel mockery of the storm that was about to be unleashed. Harper and I arrived at the venue early, slipping into the back of the ceremony hall like two silent wraiths. We kept our distance, watching from the shadows as the guests began to arrive. Aaron tried to approach us, his face etched with worry and confusion. "Delia, Harper, what's going on? Why are you hiding back here?" I met his gaze, my expression cold and unyielding. "Don't worry about us, Aaron. Just enjoy the show." Before he could protest further, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices and the sound of scuffling reached our ears, cutting through the excited chatter of the guests. Tessa appeared, her beautiful white gown billowing around her as she rushed toward the disturbance. "What's happening? Brett, where are you?" That's when we saw him. Brett, disheveled and wild-eyed, being led away in handcuffs by two stern-faced officers. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as they took in the shocking scene. Tessa's face drained of color, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. "Brett, what's going on? Why are you being arrested?" He tried to struggle free, his voice a desperate snarl. "It's all lies. Those bitches set me up." His eyes found mine in the crowd, and for a moment our gazes locked. A twisted smile curved my lips as I reveled in the sweet taste of revenge. The officers hauled him away, his curses and threats echoing through the hall. Tessa collapsed to her knees, great heaving sobs racking her body as the reality of the situation sank in. Harper gripped my arm, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. "You did it," she breathed. "You really did it." I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from the unraveling disaster before us. Guests were fleeing in droves, their faces etched with disgust and disbelief. Tessa's bridesmaids hovered around her, their expressions a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Aaron pushed his way through the chaos, his face pale and drawn. "Delia, what have you done?" I met his gaze, my expression unapologetic. I did what needed to be done. Brett got exactly what he deserved. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "This isn't how we handle things. You've gone too far." But I didn't care about his disapproval. In that moment, all that mattered was the sweet taste of victory, the knowledge that Brett's reign of terror was over. As the dust settled and the venue emptied, Tessa remained a crumpled figure on the floor, her dreams and hopes for the future shattered around her. Harper squeezed my hand, a silent understanding passing between us. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Brett's downfall was just the beginning. In the days following the disastrous wedding, the news of Brett's arrest and the subsequent fallout became the subject of intense media scrutiny. Overnight, Tessa and her disgraced fiancé became social pariahs, their reputations in tatters. "Can you believe this?" Harper would exclaim, brandishing the latest tabloid article with a mix of glee and disgust. "They're calling him the embezzling ex-fiancé." I couldn't help but revel in Brett's public humiliation, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me each time his name was dragged through the mud. Tessa, for her part, remained holed up in her apartment, refusing to answer calls or face the world. Aaron tried desperately to reach out to her, but his efforts were met with stony silence. "She's devastated," he confided in me, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and frustration. "I don't know how to help her through this." I scoffed at his words, my contempt for Tessa's wallowing evident. She made her bed when she chose that scumbag over her own family. Don't expect me to feel sorry for her. As the weeks dragged on, the consequences of Brett's actions rippled outward, affecting those closest to him. Business partners severed ties, friends distanced themselves, and his once promising career lay in ruins. It was during this time that I finally confronted him face to face. Harper and I had made a habit of staking out his apartment, reveling in the schadenfreude of watching him slink home each night, a shell of his former arrogant self. One evening as he emerged from the building, his shoulders hunched and his eyes downcast, I couldn't resist the opportunity. Well, if it isn't the disgraced ex-fiancé himself," I called out, my voice dripping with disdain. He whipped around, his eyes widening in recognition and fury. "You," he spat, his hands curling into fists. "You did this to me, you crazy bitch." Harper moved to intervene, but I held up a hand silencing her. This was my moment, and I intended to savor it. "No, Brett," I said, my voice laced with venom. "You did this to yourself. All I did was expose the truth about the kind of lying, cheating scumbag you really are." His face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But Harper's presence seemed to give him pause, and he settled for hurling insults instead. "You're going to pay for this," he snarled. "Mark my words, you and your little brat are going to regret the day you crossed me." I threw back my head and laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Regret? The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. You got exactly what you deserved, you miserable excuse for a human being." With that, I turned on my heel, leaving him seething in impotent fury. Harper fell into step beside me, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was amazing," she breathed. "You really showed him." I nodded, a sense of triumph swelling within me. Brett's threats rang hollow. He was a broken man, his power and influence stripped away. It was then that Tessa finally emerged from her self-imposed exile, her face haggard and her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She sought me out, her expression a mixture of sorrow and shame. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I was so blind, so incredibly stupid." I regarded her coolly, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. "You're right about that. You chose that piece of trash over your own family." Tears welled in her eyes, and she dropped to her knees before me, a broken woman. I know, and I'm so sorry. Please, you have to believe me, I never meant for things to get so out of hand. Harper hovered nearby, her expression softening as she watched her sister's anguish. I remained unmoved, my heart hardened by years of rejection and pain. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Tessa. You broke this family, and I don't know if we can ever truly put it back together. Her shoulders shook with sobs, and for a moment I felt a twinge of pity. But the memory of Brett's insults, his utter disrespect, quashed any impulse toward forgiveness. I'll do anything, Tessa pleaded, her voice choked with tears. Anything to make things right again. I gazed down at her, my expression impassive. We'll see about that. But mark my words, Tessa, the path to redemption won't be an easy one. As she wept at my feet, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous journey. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that our family might one day be whole again. In the aftermath of Brett's downfall, the road to healing was a long and arduous one. Tessa remained steadfast in her remorse, her pleas for forgiveness a constant refrain. I know I don't deserve it, she would say, her eyes brimming with tears. But please, give me a chance to make things right. Aaron, ever the peacemaker, urged me to extend an olive branch. She's our daughter, Delia. We have to try and move past this for the sake of our family. I would regard him coolly, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. She made her choice when she chose that scumbag over us. Why should I forgive her now? Harper, caught in the middle, tried her best to mediate. Mom, she's really trying here. Can't you see how much she's hurting? I would soften, if only a little, that at Harper's words. Our bond, forged in the fires of betrayal, remained unbreakable. Slowly, grudgingly, I began to entertain the idea of reconciliation. Tessa's constant presence, her unwavering efforts to make amends, gradually wore away at the walls I had erected around my heart. It was during one of our strained family dinners that the breakthrough finally came. I know I can never undo the pain I've caused, Tessa said, her voice trembling with emotion. But I swear to you, from the bottom of my heart, that I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, and for the first time I felt the icy grip of anger begin to thaw. Harper reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. Give her a chance, Mom, please. I met Tessa's gaze, searching for any trace of deception, any hint of the selfishness that had once consumed her. But all I saw was raw, unguarded remorse. With a heavy sigh, I nodded. All right, but understand this, it's going to take time. A lot of time. Tessa's face crumpled with relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. From that day on, the healing process began in earnest. It was a slow, often painful journey, fraught with setbacks and emotional landmines, but Tessa remained steadfast, her commitment to making amends never wavering. Aaron, his eyes shining with pride, watched as our family began to knit itself back together. I knew you could do it, he murmured, pulling me into a warm embrace. Harper, my constant ally, beamed with joy as the rifts between us gradually closed. I told you she was worth another chance, she said, her voice filled with affection for her sister. As for me, I navigated the path to forgiveness with cautious optimism. The wounds ran deep, the scars of betrayal still tender. But in Tessa's unwavering remorse, I saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim the family I had once cherished. It would be a long road, paved with difficult conversations and hard-won trust. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that we could emerge from this crucible stronger, more resilient, and more tightly bound than ever before. The path to redemption had been set, and though the journey would be arduous, I knew in my heart that we would walk it together as a family. Another Friday night, another special dinner to celebrate Carter's homecoming. I sighed as I put the final touches on the table setting. Dean had asked me to prepare Carter's favorite meal to welcome him back from his first year of college. Despite my reservations, I wanted to make a good impression and start on the right foot. The front door opened and Carter strolled in nonchalantly. Hey, he muttered with a slight nod before brushing past me into the living room. Carter, you're home! Dean greeted him warmly, pulling him into a hug. How was the drive? Long, Carter shrugged, glancing around dismissively. Smells like someone's been cooking up a storm. I forced a smile. I made your favorite, Pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes. Thought we could have a nice family dinner to celebrate you being back. Carter scoffed. Seriously? I've been looking forward to freedom from this sort of thing all year. He flopped onto the couch and grabbed the TV remote. Dean frowned slightly. Carter, your stepmom went to a lot of effort here. The least you could do is join us for dinner. Like I said, I'm free now. No more obligatory family crap. Carter didn't even look up from flipping channels. Disappointment and humiliation washed over me, but I refused to cause a scene on Carter's first night back. It's no problem, really. I'll just leave you two to catch up. I hurried to the kitchen, fighting back tears. So much for trying to build bridges with my stepson. After a year apart, I'd hoped Carter might meet me halfway, but his cold reception made it clear nothing had changed. As I scraped the ruined dinner into the trash, I wondered just how long I could keep playing happy family. Over the following weeks, cracks began to show in our familial facade. Whenever Dean was at work, Carter made sure to subtly undermine me at every turn. He'd leave messes around the house, claiming he'd forgotten whose job it was to clean up after him. Snide remarks about my cooking skills became routine, even though he'd once raved about my meals. One afternoon, Dean got home early to find me frantically searching the den. "What's going on?" he asked with concern. Before I could explain, Carter sauntered in with a smirk. "Sorry, forgot to mention. I saw Jenna rummaging through your office earlier. Seemed pretty suspicious." Dean turned to me, his expression a mix of confusion and disappointment. "Jenna? Were you going through my things?" "No, of course not," I protested, shooting Carter a glare. "I was just looking for my necklace. It's gone missing." Carter shrugged innocently. "Maybe you should be more careful with your stuff." An uneasy silence fell over the room. Dean rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Well, I'm sure it'll turn up. Just try to be a bit more organized, okay, honey?" My mouth hung open in disbelief as Carter slipped away, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. He knew exactly what he was doing, planting seeds of doubt to drive a wedge between Dean and me. The incidents continued, each one chipping away at my credibility bit by bit. A missing set of car keys somehow ended up in my purse. A kitchen knife disappeared only to reappear tucked under the couch cushions. No matter how much I denied any involvement, Carter's well-timed observations made me seem careless at best, deceitful at worst. Dean tried to stay impartial, but I could see the strain it put on him. As much as he wanted to trust his wife, his son's steady stream of accusations made him second-guess everything. The man I'd fallen in love with, kind, caring, always willing to hear me out, started to pull away imperceptibly. Some nights I'd lie awake, Carter's chuckle echoing in my mind as I replayed the latest incident. Tears stung my eyes at the realization that my stepson was slowly poisoning my relationship with Dean, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. At least not yet. Carter's vendetta against me only escalated as the summer trudged on. He became more brazen, ramping up the disrespect whenever Dean had to work late. I did my best to bite my tongue, not wanting to come across as the nagging stepmother constantly complaining about her stepson. One afternoon, Dean was out running errands when Carter barged into the living room trailing a thick plume of pungent smoke. "Carter, are you smoking in the house?" I coughed, waving the haze away. He blew a cloud of smoke in my direction defiantly. "So what if I am?" "You know the rules. No smoking inside, especially not your father's cigars." I gestured to the expensive Cuban cigar smoldering between his fingers. Carter sneered. "Dad's too busy working his ass off to enjoy them anyway. Might as well get some use out of the things." Anger burned in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Put it out right now, or I'll tell your father myself." In response, Carter defiantly took another long drag, then strutted down the hallway, leaving an acrid trail in his wake. I spent the next hour trying to air out the house before Dean got home. A few days later, the campus dean called to notify us that Carter had been suspended for the upcoming semester due to conduct violations. Dean was beside himself, demanding an explanation from his son. Carter simply shrugged it off. "Bunch of bees charges, doesn't matter. I'll just take some time off and re-enroll later." While Dean ranted about wasted potential, I pulled Carter aside. "How could you jeopardize your education like that? Don't you care at all about your future?" He laughed coldly. Save the self-righteous mom routine for someone who actually cares what you think. In that moment, I lost my temper, raising my voice for the first time. You arrogant, ungrateful little... Everything okay over here? Dean interrupted, clearly concerned by our heated exchange. I swallowed hard, my face flushed. It's fine, I lied through gritted teeth. Carter just smirked triumphantly. I realized then I had two choices. Confront Carter and risk driving a wedge between Dean and his only child, or stay silent in hopes the brat would eventually grow up. I opted for the latter, at least for the time being. Carter's destructive behavior reached a climax a few weeks later when he decided to throw an unauthorized party at our house. Dean was out of town on business, leaving me to deal with the entitled brat. Around 10 p.m., cars began lining the street outside. Thumping bass shook the windows as groups of rowdy college kids streamed in carrying cases of beer. I stormed into the living room to find Carter in the midst of the chaos. "What is going on here?" I shouted over the music. "You can't just throw a party without asking." Carter laughed derisively. "Last I checked, I still live here. I'll do whatever I want. Not under my roof." I reached for the stereo to shut off the ear-splitting music, but a drunk partygoer shoved me away. "Hey, back off, lady," he slurred. Hands trembling with rage, I dialed Dean's number. Voicemail. I left an urgent message pleading for him to come home and put an end to this madness. The party raged into the early morning hours. Beer cans and red Solo cups littered the floor. Someone had vomited on the new rug in the den. When I threatened to call the cops, Carter just laughed coldly. "Go ahead. I'd love to see you try to explain this one to Dad." By the time the last reveler finally stumbled out, dawn was breaking. I collapsed on the couch, utterly drained and dreading the inevitable fallout when Dean returned. Sure enough, he was blindsided the second he walked through the door. "What the hell happened here?" he roared upon seeing the trash state of our home. Carter was waiting with a wry grin. "Sorry, Dad. Tried to keep things under control, but Jenna's party got way out of hand. She must have invited half the neighborhood over." My jaw dropped at the outrageous lie. "That's not true at all. He threw this stupid..." Dean held up a hand, his eyes blazing with anger. "I don't want to hear any more excuses, Jenna. Just go clean up this mess while I figure out how to pay for the damages." As I fought back furious tears, picking up shards of broken glass and overturned furniture, I knew Carter had finally crossed a line. This was war, and I was done playing nice. In the days following the disastrous party, I reached my breaking point. Carter's snide comments and underhanded tactics had gone too far. It was time to fight fire with fire. While Dean was at work, I discreetly set up hidden cameras throughout the house, in the living room, kitchen, even Carter's bedroom. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure to catch every crooked move on film. Carter must have sensed the shifting dynamic, because he started actively trying to get under my skin at every opportunity. Dirty dishes were left out with mocking notes like, "Thanks for cleaning up after me, stepmommy." He'd barge into rooms and fart obnoxiously before winking at me. Childish pranks, but clearly designed to provoke a reaction. The final straw came when I discovered my favorite potted plant had been unceremoniously dumped over, soil littering the carpet. As I knelt to scoop up the mess, Carter strutted by. "You really should be more careful," he tsked. "Wouldn't want Dad thinking you've let the place go." White-hot fury blazed within me, but I refused to take the bait this time. "You're right, Carter. I'll be sure to show your father just how careless I've been." His cocky grin faltered slightly at my uncharacteristic calm. For once, I wasn't playing the flustered victim. Over the next few weeks, I diligently cataloged Carter's escalating misbehavior via the hidden cameras. There were the obvious things: him smugly admitting to the plant incident, emptying my bathroom cabinets onto the floor, even rifling through my underwear drawer and pocketing a lacy pair of panties with a depraved cackle. But there were also more subtle slights captured. Him purposefully breaking a vase and staging the shards to frame me, or scuffing up the walls near my bedroom before telling Dean he saw me carelessly knocking into them with boxes. My rage simmered, but I remained outwardly unperturbed, quietly letting Carter dig himself deeper and deeper into a hole of his own making. Dean noticed the change and occasionally commented on how I seemed calmer about the whole situation. Little did he know, The cameras were rolling, documenting every piece of incriminating proof. At last, it was time to bring Carter's reprehensible behavior into the light. With the damning video evidence compiled, I began eagerly awaiting the right moment to utterly shatter his fake image of the innocent, put-upon son. A deliciously devious smile crossed my lips as I imagined the look of shock and horror on Carter's sneering face when I revealed just how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered him. Revenge would be sweet. I decided to strike at our next family dinner, when Dean's parents, Bonnie and Roy, would also be present. As we gathered around the table, Carter was already working his magic, charming his grandparents with that fake smile he reserved for relatives. "College agrees with you, Carter," Bonnie remarked proudly, "so mature and responsible." Carter flashed me a sly look as he replied, "I sure have had to grow up fast, Graham, especially dealing with certain household situations." Dean's brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Carter could respond, I cleared my throat loudly. "Actually, I'm glad you all are here. There's something I need to address." I turned to my dumbfounded husband. "Dean, I've spent months trying my best to keep the peace, to not rock the boat with Carter's behavior." I shot Carter a pointed glare and he paled slightly. "But enough is enough. The disrespect, the deliberate cruelty and mind games, it stops tonight." My heart raced as I prepared to unveil my carefully assembled proof. Carter squirmed in his seat. "Listen, whatever she's about to say—" "Shut up," I snapped, a firm edge in my voice that hung in the air. Carter's eyes went wide, rendered speechless for once. Pulling out my phone, I queued up the first video clip and turned it towards Dean and his parents. It showed Carter gleefully vandalizing my plant, grinning wickedly at the camera. A collective gasp went around the table. That's not what it looks like," Carter sputtered weakly. But I was just getting started. One by one, I played the videos. Carter purposefully trying to get me in trouble with staged incidents, his crude violation of my privacy, even outright admitting to the party that had caused so much strife. With each new piece of evidence, my stepson's eyes darted around desperately until he was finally rendered mute, unable to talk his way out of this. Dean's face was pale, his expression one of utter disbelief and horror as he watched his only child's true nature be laid bare. Even Bonnie and Roy were dumbstruck by the events unfolding before them. When the finale video played, a montage of Carter's most vile verbal insults and threats directed at me, a deafening silence hung over the table. I looked each of them squarely in the eyes before finally meeting Carter's pathetic, trembling gaze. "So," I stated flatly. "Any other questions about my behavior?" The silence that followed was excruciating. Carter shifted uncomfortably, his mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. Dean stared at his son, utterly shell-shocked, while Bonnie and Roy bore matching expressions of horrified disbelief. Finally, Dean found his voice, the words coming out in a trembling rasp. "Carter, what? How could you?" Carter licked his lips nervously and tried to force a chuckle. "Come on, Dad. You know how good I am with computers. That footage is obviously faked. Don't you dare try to lie anymore," I exploded, slamming my fist on the table. "We've all seen the truth with our own eyes." "Is it true, Carter?" Bonnie's voice was tight with unshed tears. "Did you really do those horrible things to Jenna?" For a long moment, Carter avoided her piercing gaze. Then, almost inaudibly, he muttered, "So what if I did?" The smug defiance in his tone lit a fire in Dean's eyes. He shot up from his chair, the legs screeching against the floor. "That's enough. I will not have you disrespecting my wife any longer with your twisted games." Carter recoiled from the booming force of his father's voice. In all the years I'd known them, I'd never seen Dean raise his voice like that towards his son. The alpha male persona was chilling. "But, Dad, you have to listen." "No, you listen." Dean stabbed a finger towards Carter's face, his jaw clenching with barely restrained rage. "I don't know what I did to make you resent Jenna so much, to treat her so atrociously. But I can promise you, those days of disrespect under my roof are over." Carter opened his mouth to protest, but Dean barreled forward. "In fact, I think it's time you experience the real world without Mommy and Daddy's support. Starting tonight, you're going to find your own place to live and get a job to pay your bills. Maybe taking some personal responsibility will straighten you out." The spoiled brat's face twisted into an ugly snarl. You're choosing her over your own flesh and blood? Some great father you are! Almost instantly, Bonnie fixed Carter with a withering look. Don't you dare speak to your father that way after what we just saw. He's right. It's long past time you faced some consequences for your actions. The certainty in her tone, mirrored by Roy's solemn nod, seemed to drain the last of Carter's bravado. He cast one final venomous glare at me before storming out of the dining room, footsteps pounding up the stairs. As the tension finally broke, I sagged back in my chair, suddenly feeling every ounce of the burden I'd been carrying for months. Dean pulled me into a tight embrace, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, Jenna, he whispered into my hair. Sorry I didn't see the truth sooner, but I promise you, no more games, no more toxicity. It's time Carter faced reality. After all the anguish and anger, an immense sense of relief washed over me. Finally, no more torment, no more lies corrupting my marriage. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. In the aftermath of that explosive dinner, Carter wasted no time moving out of the house. Dean stood firm, refusing to enable his son's entitled behavior any longer. A tense silence lingered between them as Carter packed up his belongings. You'll regret this, Carter spat viciously at me before storming out the door with his bags. Just you wait. But his threats rang hollow now. Dean and I had already weathered the worst of Carter's tantrums. With the dark truth exposed, his hold over us was broken. The first few months apart were admittedly rough. Carter stubbornly tried to make it on his own, too proud to admit failure and ask for help. Dean received terse messages about dead-end jobs and dingy apartments. I could tell it pained him to watch his son struggle. Roy and Bonnie remained ambivalent, their loyalty torn between siding with their grandson and acknowledging the wake-up call he so clearly needed. Our weekly family dinners were strained affairs, with Carter conspicuously absent. Slowly but surely, however, Carter's defiant exterior began to crack as the challenges of self-reliance took their toll. He finally swallowed what was left of his pride and re-enrolled in community college, realizing the value of completing his degree. One night, Dean and I were curled up watching a movie when his phone buzzed. He frowned at the caller ID but answered tentatively. Hello, Carter? I watched Dean's expression morph from concern to stunned disbelief as Carter's voice crackled through the line. After a long pause, the faintest hint of a smile played across his lips. When he finally ended the call, Dean turned to me with an almost giddy look. Carter, he apologized. He says living alone has been humbling, made him realize how good he really had it. My own jaw dropped as Dean continued. He asked if he could come by soon to apologize in person and get a fresh start. Though part of me still harbored resentment over Carter's cruelty, I could only nod numbly and pull Dean into a fierce hug. In that moment, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of hope that our family could finally heal. True to his word, Carter sheepishly appeared on our doorstep a week later, his cockiness replaced by a haggard vulnerability. As he struggled to meet my gaze, I could see the arrogant, selfish boy had been replaced by someone rawer, more aware of life's difficulties. Jenna, I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, he began haltingly. But I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, how sorry I am for everything I put you through. The way I acted, it was inexcusable. Carter's eyes shone with the first hints of genuine remorse I'd ever witnessed. If you're willing, I'd like us to start over, to have a real relationship built on mutual understanding and respect. Because at the end of the day, he paused, choking up. You're the only mother I've got. In that moment, something deep inside me unlocked. The resentment, the fury, the urge to make him pay, it all melted away to be replaced by the faintest ember of empathy. Raising a hand to Carter's cheek, I simply nodded. Moving forward would be a long, arduous journey, but at last, I felt like we had a chance to forge the family I'd always dreamed of. One of love, trust, and shed of Carter's poisonous influence once and for all. Welcome to the family. Adrienne's voice dripped with saccharine sweetness as she handed me a perfectly wrapped gift basket. The smug satisfaction in her eyes betrayed the innocent facade as our gazes met. I managed a polite smile as I accepted the elaborately arranged basket, concealing my unease. Adrienne had made it abundantly clear from the moment I met her that I didn't truly belong in her family's elite social circle. Her chilly disdain was expertly veiled by fake hospitality, but I recognized the game, one she'd perfected over years of keeping up appearances. "Thank you, Adrienne. It's beautiful," I replied, fighting the urge to tear open the gift immediately and expose whatever passive-aggressive jab lay within. My husband Ethan beamed with oblivious pride at my side, squeezing my hand affectionately. He remained blissfully unaware of the tension simmering between his wife and sister. As the baby shower celebrations continued, Adrienne's plastic smile never wavered as she drifted between guests, the picture of graciousness. Yet when our eyes met again across the room, her gaze pierced me like sharpened daggers. Adrienne's unspoken message screamed loud and clear. This was her turf, and I would never be more than an intruder. Steeling myself, I clutched Ethan's hand tighter as we mingled among his family and their well-heeled friends. I kept the gift basket tucked securely in my arms, dreading the carefully selected insult surely wrapped within. Hours later, after the last guest had filtered out, I retreated to the bedroom and pulled off the ribbons with trembling hands. Inside the basket lay an assortment of high-end bath products and a plush terrycloth robe, all blindingly white. At the very bottom, nestled like a viper among roses, was a single sealed envelope with neat cursive script, "Mara's fresh start." My heart plummeted as realization washed over me. Adrienne knew my deepest secret, the painful past I'd fought to put behind me. A past Ethan loved me enough to accept, but one his privileged family would never understand. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope to reveal a check for $10,000 and a brief note, "For when you're ready to walk away and spare us the embarrassment." The message was clear. Adrienne's twisted generosity bought my silence and compliance or ensured my banishment. My mouth went dry as I crumpled the note, panic and rage clashing within me. The game had begun, but this time I vowed to write my own rules. In the weeks following the baby shower, Adrienne's malicious games intensified. No longer content with subtle digs, she launched an all-out offensive to drive a wedge between Ethan and me. "Mara, darling," she trilled one afternoon, sweeping into the living room uninvited. "I simply had to stop by with this precious outfit for little Emma." She thrust an over-the-top frilly dress into my hands, the lace and bows dripping with saccharine excess. "It's lovely," I managed, forcing a smile. "But really, you shouldn't have." "Nonsense." Adrienne batted her eyes innocently. "Every little princess needs an outrageously impractical gown that she'll hate in a few years." My grip tightened on the offending garment as I bit back a scathing retort. Ethan remained oblivious, offering his sister an indulgent grin. "You spoil her, Addie. What would we do without you?" The words struck like a dagger, highlighting my exclusion from their privileged inner circle. Adrienne's syrupy laugh grated my nerves. "I'm simply providing the essentials that Mara's background seems to be lacking," she purred, inspecting her freshly manicured nails. The thinly veiled insult hung in the air. Before I could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed, and he excused himself, utterly missing the subtext of our exchange. Adrienne pounced the moment he left the room. "Let's be honest, Mara, you'll never fit in here, no matter how hard you try to play the part." Her smile morphed into a condescending sneer. "My family deserves better than a child of your circumstances." White-hot anger lanced through me, but I refused to rise to her bait. Adrienne wanted me doubting myself, slipping back into old insecurities. Well, two could play at keeping up appearances. Mustering my sweetest smile, I rose to face her squarely. "Thank you for the dress, Adrienne. How considerate of you to think of us." I watched with satisfaction as her brow creased ever so slightly, caught off guard by my sugary politeness. Over the following months, I matched Adrienne's passive aggression with sickly sweet gratitude at every turn. Compliments dripping with venom were met with humble acceptance, driving her to escalating levels of pettiness. "I picked up this lovely wood varnish for you," she announced one day, thrusting a can of harsh chemicals into my hands. "Wouldn't want those habits from your past resurfacing." I simply smiled and thanked her for her thoughtfulness. With each exchange, I could see the confusion and frustration mounting behind Adrienne's meticulously crafted mask. Her twisted games held no power over me anymore. For now, I'd play the role of adoring sister-in-law, but soon enough I'd shatter Adrienne's fragile facade and display her true ugliness for all to see. The reckoning was coming. I would be sure of it. The first prickles of doubt crept in a few weeks later when an anonymous package arrived at our doorstep. Adrian's carefully orchestrated plans were escalating. "What is this?" Ethan frowned, extracting a sealed manila envelope from the plain brown packaging. "I'm not sure." I trailed off as he tore it open. Inside was a glossy photograph of me exiting a dilapidated building, head bowed against the camera's flash. The place was all too familiar, a sobriety clinic I'd attended years ago after hitting my lowest point. "Mara?" Ethan's voice was laced with a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on?" I felt the blood drain from my face as my gaze flickered to the plain logo embossed on the envelope, "A friend who cares." Of course, only Adrian could concoct such a melodramatic, underhanded scheme. "It's from my past, before I got my life together." I swallowed hard, struggling to contain my rage. An old haunt that's better left behind. Ethan slipped an arm around me, his brow furrowed. "Why would someone send this? Trying to dredge up ancient history?" "You'd have to ask your dear sister about that." The words slipped out in a clipped tone before I could stop them. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "Adrienne, why would you accuse her of something so horrible?" "Use your eyes, Ethan." I shoved the damning photograph into his hands. "Who else would go to such depths to try driving me away?" His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. The flicker of doubt in his eyes spoke volumes. In the days after, a heavy pall hung over our home. Ethan avoided the subject, but I could see the wariness in his movements, the questioning glances when he thought I wouldn't notice. Adrienne had planted her seeds of deception, and they were taking root. The breaking point came when I returned home from running errands to find Adrienne's car in the driveway. I braced myself for another round of her twisted mind games. "There you are!" She bounced out of the front door, all sugary smiles, Ethan trailing behind with a distracted air. "I've been simply dying to catch up." Before I could formulate a response, she looped her arm through mine and steered me towards the kitchen. "Ethan told me about that dreadful photograph," she stage-whispered with a grimace. "I can't imagine who would stoop to such lows." The sickly sweet concern in her voice was a razor's edge against my nerves. "Yes, how unfortunate," I responded flatly, pulling my arm from her grasp. "I'll be sure to thank them for reopening old wounds." Adrian's eyes widened in exaggerated hurt. "Why, Mara? I'd never dream of inflicting such pain. You know I only want what's best for you and my beloved brother." Her saccharine tone twisted the knife deeper. "That's why I've reached out to a dear friend who specializes in personal makeovers, shall we say?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she barreled on with the air of one bestowing an act of supreme generosity. "Derek will be simply marvelous in helping you put the past where it belongs, behind you." Adrian smiled with smug satisfaction. "Won't that be transformative?" "That's quite enough, Addie." Ethan's sharp voice cut through her self-congratulations. "If Mara wants help, she'll let us know." My heart lurched to see him rallying to my defense. A flicker of uncertainty passed over Adrienne's face, but her mask quickly reset to one of sugary concern. "Of course, you're both right. I only want to ease this difficult transition." As she swept towards the door, she tossed one last poisoned barb over her shoulder. "After all, we are family now." The door clicked shut with sickening finality. This wasn't a game anymore, it was open warfare, and I had no choice but to fight with everything I had. In the aftermath of Adrienne's latest ploy, I found an unlikely ally in Samantha, one of Ethan's cousins. She sought me out a few days later with a somber expression. "Mara, I need to talk to you about Adrienne." I braced myself, expecting another round of her manipulations. But Samantha surprised me. "I know what she's doing. The lying, the sabotage. Adrienne put me through a similar hell a few years back." Her lips tightened into a hard line. "I won't let her do that to anyone else in this family." The raw pain in Samantha's eyes stopped me cold. Suddenly, her past falling out with Adrienne made sense. "You've seen her true colors, too," I murmured, realization dawning. Samantha nodded jerkily. "The fake smiles, the backhanded generosity, it's all a mind game to her. She can't stand seeing others happy if she's not the center of attention." Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists as she recounted Adrienne's torment when Samantha got engaged years ago. How the so-called sisterly advice slowly muddled into discreet jabs about Samantha's fiancé's shortcomings. innocent innuendos that planted seeds of doubt until her relationship collapsed under the strain. By the time I realized what she was doing, it was too late. Samantha whispered, anguish lacing her voice. I lost everything that truly mattered to me because of her malice. White-hot anger lanced through me at the thought of Adrienne's depravity, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the bigger picture. We can stop this, I stated with firm resolve, but we'll need to be smart and ready to fight fire with fire. A glimmer of hope kindled in Samantha's eyes. You have a plan? I nodded grimly. One that will blow Adrienne's twisted game wide open. But it has to be perfectly executed, with no margin for error. Over the next few weeks, Samantha and I constructed an airtight counteroffensive. We documented every one of Adrienne's thinly veiled jabs and assembled a compelling case to present to Ethan's parents. But that was just step one. The real masterstroke involved throwing an intimate family dinner, creating a perfectly staged scenario where Adrienne's vicious true nature would detonate for all to see. No more masks, no more twisted kindnesses masking her malice. As the dinner date approached, I could sense Adrienne's growing desperation in her transparent overtures of bonding over wedding china patterns and baby bronzing ideas. She knew something was afoot, but couldn't pinpoint the source of her unraveling control. The night before, Samantha and I made the final preparations, every potential stumbling block accounted for. Are you ready for this? She asked, eyes blazing with determination. Once we go through with it, there's no going back. I took a deep breath and nodded. More than ready. It's time Adrienne experienced the karma she's had coming for a long time. The next evening, the stage was set. With bright smiles and warm embraces, we welcomed Ethan's family into our home, playing the roles of genial hosts to perfection. Even Adrienne seemed to let her guard down fractionally as she breezed in, her trademark smugness in place. She knew how to work a crowd, a fact I was counting on. As the evening built towards its crescendo, I caught Samantha's eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Her grim smile and slight tilt of her glass was all the response I needed. Let the reckoning begin. As the dinner proceeded, the air thickened with tension. Samantha and I exchanged furtive glances, silently coordinating our every move. Adrienne, ever the mistress of performance, remained blindly oblivious to the trap being carefully laid. Mara, darling, you simply must tell me where you found this exquisite china pattern, she gushed, running a perfectly manicured nail along the rim of her plate. The details are just sublime. I suppressed an eye roll at her overwrought theatrics. Oh, just a little something I picked up, I replied with syrupy sweetness. I'm delighted you like it. Adrienne's smile stretched a touch too wide, giving her porcelain features a manic cast. Like it? I absolutely adore it. She turned to address the rest of the table, her voice carrying just an octave too high. Mara has such impeccable taste, don't you agree? A few murmurs of polite agreement rippled around the table. Ethan's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, no doubt registering the undercurrent of tension. I had her squirming now, just as we'd planned. Well, you know me, I demurred with a tinkling laugh. I simply can't resist finding little treasures in unexpected places. Adrienne's eyes narrowed infinitesimally at the seeming barb. Samantha caught my gaze and arched a challenging eyebrow. Game on. In fact, I continued in a louder tone, these plates held quite the checkered past before finding their way to me. Confused glances ricocheted around the table, but Adrienne remained laser-focused, the tightness around her eyes the only crack in her facade. You see, I pressed on relentlessly, they have a history of being rejected, cast aside by the very people who should have cherished them most. A muscle twitched in Adrienne's jaw, but she remained outwardly impassive. Touché. The barbs continued flying in both directions, each phrased with such exaggerated politeness that the others remained oblivious to the underlying battle being waged. Finally, in a stroke of feigned concern, Samantha interjected, Adrienne, I do hope you're not coming down with something. You look quite flushed. The harried desperation was palpable in Adrienne's too bright smile now. Whatever do you mean? I'm perfectly... Perhaps it's all this talk of treasures with complicated backgrounds, Samantha crooned with faux innocence. It can be quite discomforting for those of us unaccustomed to such acquired tastes. In that moment, something inside Adrienne seemed to snap. Her lips peeled back in a rictus snarl as she rounded on me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, the venom laid bare at last. "With your second-hand soul and—" The rushed self-editing was too late. Ethan's eyes went wide with shock, and a dismayed murmur reverberated around the table. Adrian froze as if realizing too late the veil had slipped in spectacular fashion. Her gaze swiveled wildly around the stunned, accusing faces staring back at her. With a garbled cry, she shoved back from the table and fled the room, leaving only a ringing silence in her wake. Finally, at long last, the truth was laid bare. I caught Samantha's eye from across the table, and we shared an exhale of grim triumph. The time for judgment had come, and Adrienne was the one found sorely wanting. The silence that followed Adrienne's exit was deafening. All eyes turned towards me, a kaleidoscope of shock, accusation, and dawning realization etched across the faces of Ethan's family. I drew a fortifying breath, letting the weight of Adrienne's unmasking settle over us all. Ethan was the first to find his voice, his expression twisting with a potent mix of anger and disbelief. "Mara, what is going on? What was she talking about? Second-hand soul?" The hurt and confusion in his eyes lanced straight through me, but I refused to buckle under the burden of Adrienne's poison. "It's about my past," I stated, keeping my voice level. "The struggles I went through before finding my way to you." I sent him a pointed look, willing him to understand. Realization flickered across Ethan's features as the unspoken truth, the former addiction I'd confided in him years ago, blazed into the open. His mother paled, grasping the implication immediately. "Adrienne?" she breathed, horror tempering her voice. Surely she didn't. I fixed her with an unwavering stare. "She's been tormenting me for months, ever since she learned about my history." Looks like her mask finally slipped. A tense silence stretched out as the implications sank in. Ethan's father was the first to find his voice, an edge of steel framing his words. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. His palm slammed against the table with a resonant thud. "We'll get to the bottom of this immediately." No sooner had the declaration left his lips than a tremulous Adrienne reappeared in the doorway, hastily dabbing at her perfectly made-up eyes with a lace handkerchief, the very picture of an aggrieved victim. I don't know what came over me," she stammered unconvincingly. "The stress of hosting, it all became too much." Despite her theatrical display, something profound had shifted. Her aura of superiority and entitlement was stripped away, leaving only a shrill, flailing desperation in its wake. "Save your hollow apologies, Adrienne," Ethan bit out, his normally affable demeanor replaced by frigid condemnation. "We know about your games, your cruelty towards Mara." Her bravado faltered momentarily, then the fight reignited in her eyes with bitter defiance. "You can't possibly think I'd stand idly by while you destroyed this family's standing by dragging in." Her lip curled with naked disdain. Her kind. A collective recoil spread around the room, but I held my ground, meeting her venomous stare with stoic resolution. There would be no redemption for the likes of Adrienne, not after this. That's enough. Ethan's father's voice cut through the tension like a knife, all traces of warmth extinguished. "You're clearly too far gone to be reasoned with right now." Adrienne opened her mouth, defiance blazing in her eyes, but her father raised a mollifying hand. "Don't say another word you can't take back, Adrienne. For now, you'll return to your apartment until you can rejoin society with a reality-based perspective." The ultimatum hung in the air like an executioner's blade. For a moment, it seemed Adrienne might rally one last poisonous counterattack. Then, just as swiftly, the fight drained from her body, leaving only a hollow, bitter husk. With a wordless hiss, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming mutely behind her. Silence reigned in the wake of her departure. I could practically sense the years of willful blindness being shed, the blinders falling away from those who'd enabled Adrienne's manipulations for far too long. Eventually, it was Ethan's mother who found her voice, weariness etching the lines around her eyes. "Mara, we owe you an apology, a profound one." She shook her head slowly. "We let this ugliness happen, let Adrienne run amok for reasons I can't begin to fathom." I opened my mouth to respond, but she pressed on with quiet resolution. "No more excuses. It's time we, as a family, faced the consequences of enabling a monster in our midst." Around the table, solemn nods met her words. At long last, the bitter truth was embraced. A single teardrop traced down my cheek as Ethan's arms enveloped me in a fierce, sheltering embrace. Justice and reckoning had both been served, in more ways than one. Most importantly, I'd been seen. And there was no going back now. In the days following Adrienne's explosive unmasking, a palpable shift gripped the family. The sisterly bond between her and Ethan, once ironclad, had been irreparably shattered. All that remained was a haunting void where unconditional loyalty once resided. "I can't believe the depth she stooped to," Ethan murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. We were seated in the living room, replaying the events in a numb daze. How could she be so cruel, so evil? I said nothing, simply wrapping my arms around him as he grappled with the harsh reality before us. Ethan's parents entered, their expressions ashen. "We've made arrangements for Adrienne," his mother began woodenly. "She'll be staying with your aunt upstate for the time being." Ethan tensed beside me, and I could sense his instinctive urge to protest, to find some thread of redemption to cling to. But his father's next words severed that futile hope. "It's not just us, son. Word is spreading about her behavior." He pinched the bridge of his nose, looking every bit his age. "The Ladies' Society has decided to disassociate from her, effective immediately." A chill lanced through me. The prestigious Ladies' Society wielded enormous social capital and influence. Being ousted was a death knell. "No," Ethan's anguished whisper said it all. He may have finally seen Adrienne's toxic truth, but having it blasted across high society was another devastating reckoning altogether. Over the next few weeks, the shunning rippled outward in a withering conflagration. Friends who'd once flocked to bask in Adrienne's archly curated aura now froze her out like a leper. Invitations ceased arriving, event attendance dried up, even the slightest interaction was scrutinized by those desperate to distance themselves from the pariah in our midst. The single-minded cruelty that had once been Adrienne's calling card was suddenly, viciously reflected back on her tenfold, and she had no one to blame but her own runaway malice. I finally crossed paths with her at the country club one sunny afternoon. She was a diminished shadow seated alone at a remote patio table, shoulders slumped in uncharacteristic defeat. As I approached, her eyes flicked up, and for a fleeting instant I saw the naked hurt and bewilderment laid bare, an ugly truth she could no longer deny. Then just as quickly, the shutters slammed down. Her lips twisted in a snarl of pure unbridled loathing. "Is this what you wanted? To take everything from me? To leave me with nothing?" The venom in her words struck like a physical blow, but this time I refused to recoil. "I didn't take anything, Adrienne," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "You brought this on yourself with your jealousy and hatred. This." I waved a hand at the empty, shunned tableau surrounding us. "This is just karma's shadow finally catching up." For a suspended moment, she seemed to teeter on the precipice of impotent rage and a dawning, horrified self-realization. Then her shoulders slumped, the fight visibly leaching out of her. "Just leave me be," she muttered, turning away in hollowed resignation. And with that, I did. Because the battle was long over, I'd emerged the decisive victor simply by embracing the resilience and perseverance Adrienne could never comprehend. In the end, her downfall hadn't required any malicious machinations, any shadowy revenge plots. Her increasingly frantic attempts to claw her way back into society's favor only cemented her disgrace further. Like a human supernova burning itself out, Adrienne's hatred had simply consumed her from within. I realized then that closure and vindication had been within me all along. All I'd needed was the strength to let karma run its implacable course. In the aftermath of Adrienne's spectacular downfall, an unfamiliar sense of peace settled over our family. The constant undercurrent of tension, the minefields we'd all tiptoed through for far too long, had finally been diffused. Ethan in particular seemed to stand taller. The weight of his sister's toxicity finally lifted from his shoulders. Our relationship only grew stronger from the shared trauma we'd endured and overcome. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth," he murmured one night as we readied for bed, his arms enveloping me in a tender embrace. "You tried to warn me, but I just couldn't accept how far Adrienne had fallen." I pulled back and met his gaze steadily. "This wasn't your burden to carry alone, Ethan. That's what partnership means. facing the worst of storms together, not just the sunshine. Something shimmered in the depths of his eyes, profound gratitude laced with an abiding love. His kiss spoke volumes as our bodies intertwined in the gathering twilight. In the days and weeks ahead, the renewed bonds with Ethan's parents also blossomed in ways I'd never dared hope for. What had once been a tenuous, artificial connection slowly melted into genuine affection and acceptance. "We should have listened to you about Adrian from the start," his father admitted one evening over brandy and cigars. "But, well, you know the power of delusion regarding family." I nodded, understanding that all too keenly, but the hurt had faded, replaced by a world of possibility now that the wool had been ripped away. "No more deceptions," I stated, meeting his gaze levelly. "We start over from a place of honesty this time." His returning nod spoke volumes, and with it a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Even in the wider social circles that had once been Adrian's playground, our family's standing slowly rebounded. Where she had sown disgrace and alienation, we now reaped the rewards of solidarity and loyalty hard won. At a charity gala weeks later, I found myself pulled aside by the grand dame of the Ladies' Society, the same woman who had cast the irrevocable shunning of Adrian. "Mrs. Wells," she began with the barest hint of contrition tinging her gravelly voice, "I fear we may have misjudged you upon your arrival into our circle. Scurrilous rumors can be most misleading." She drew herself up, somehow managing to look down her nose at me despite her diminutive stature. "It's clear now that your poise and character were the targets of sabotage from, well, you know the source." Her lips compressed into a grim line. "Words may have been said that cannot be unsaid. Associations questioned that cannot be unbroken." I tensed imperceptibly, bracing for the inevitable slight that seemed destined to follow, but the dame's next words knocked me backward on my heels. "We would be honored if you would consider accompanying us for next month's retreat at the Hampton estate." My breath caught in my throat as I parsed the audacious overture. The Hampton retreat was the most elite, coveted social event of the season, a privilege solely for those ensconced at the upper echelons. To be invited, especially in the wake of the Adrian fallout, was tantamount to being embraced back into the innermost circle, whole and unquestioned. The message was clear. I'd survived the crucible, emerging untarnished while Adrian burned away to ash and infamy. Struggling to keep my features impassive, I inclined my head with studied grace. "The honor would be mine, Dame Elizabeth. I accept most humbly." As she bobbed her own regal acknowledgement, a warm sense of triumph bloomed in my chest. Not a retribution or conquest fueled by pettiness, but a hard-won victory over hatred and prejudice itself. This was the new foundation, wrought from adversity and perseverance. And as I turned to rejoin Ethan at my side, our fingers intertwining with unshakable solidarity, I knew our bond would be eternal. For in conquering our harshest demons from within, we'd forged an invincible bastion against whatever storms still awaited on the horizon.
The call came at 3 a.m., exactly 1 year after Mark stole everything from me. I was still awake, nursing a glass of wine and staring at old family photos, a habit I'd developed since losing both the business and my parents in the same cruel year. My name is Viviana, and until last year, I was the co-heir to Swanson Technologies, a company my parents built from nothing. Now I'm just another unemployed tech executive with a vendetta. "Your brother's making mistakes," the voice on the phone said. "Big ones. Thought you might want to know." I sat up straighter, wine forgotten. "Who is this?" "Someone who thinks you got a raw deal. Check your email." "And Viviana, Meridian Tech is hiring." The line went dead before I could respond. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop, finding a single new email containing internal documents from my family's company. Now Mark's company. The financials were worse than I'd imagined. "Bastards running it into the ground," I whispered, scrolling through the numbers. My phone buzzed. A text from my Aunt Rachel. "Can't sleep either? Come over." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Rachel's kitchen, the familiar scent of her chamomile tea filling the air. She'd been more of a mother to me since my parents died, especially after Mark's betrayal. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Rachel said, sliding a steaming mug toward me. I just got some interesting information about Mark's company. I pulled out my phone, showing her the documents. He's making exactly the mistakes Dad always warned us about. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she studied the screen. And what do you plan to do with this information? I don't know yet. I did know, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Remember last month when I tried to confront him at the office? How could I forget? Security escorted you out while he watched from his window. The memory made my blood boil. He didn't even have the decency to face me, just stood there, drinking Dad's favorite whiskey from Dad's crystal glass in Dad's office. Your office, Rachel corrected. It should have been yours too. He had it all planned, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. While Mom and Dad were in the hospital after the accident, he was already meeting with lawyers, changing documents, moving assets. By the time they passed, I couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. What are you thinking, Vivi? Meridian Tech is hiring. Mark's biggest competitor? Rachel's eyebrows shot up. Now that would be interesting. My phone buzzed again. Elena, my best friend since college, requesting a video call. I answered, and her concerned face filled the screen. Vi, I just saw the news. Mark's announcing his engagement tomorrow. What? The mug slipped from my hand, spilling tea across Rachel's pristine tablecloth. To who? Gabriella Joseph. That investor's daughter he's been seeing. There's going to be a press conference in the morning. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. He takes the company, and now he's going to play happy families in front of the cameras. The prodigal son carrying on our parents' legacy. Don't let him win, Elena said firmly. Not like this. Rachel was already cleaning up the spilled tea, but her eyes were fixed on me. She's right. You're stronger than him, Viviana. Always have been. I stood up, my decision made. I need to go home and update my resume. Meridian Tech's going to want to see it first thing in the morning. What are you planning? Elena asked through the phone. I looked at the family photo on Rachel's wall. Mom, Dad, Mark, and me at the company's 20th anniversary celebration. We were all smiling then, before the accident, before the betrayal. I'm planning to take back what's mine, I said. But first, I'm going to learn exactly how he did it. Rachel nodded slowly. Your father always said the best revenge is success. This isn't about revenge, I lied, gathering my things. It's about justice. As I drove home through the empty streets, my anonymous caller's words echoed in my mind. Mark was making mistakes, big ones, and soon, very soon, I would make him pay for every single one of them. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Interview tomorrow, 9 a.m. Maurice Brown's office. Don't be late. I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Game on, big brother, game on. Maurice Brown's office was everything my father's hadn't been. Sleek, modern, and intimidating. The man himself sat behind a glass desk, studying my resume with an intensity that made me nervous. Your credentials are impressive, he said finally, looking up. But let's address the elephant in the room. You're Mark's sister. I replied, keeping my voice steady. Now I'm just someone who knows every aspect of how Swanson Technologies operates. A slight smile crossed his face. And why should I believe you'd be loyal to Meridian? Because my brother made sure I have nothing left to lose. I leaned forward. He betrayed me, Mr. Brown. But more importantly, he's destroying everything my parents built. I want to help Meridian become what Swanson Technologies should have been. Maurice stood up, walking to his window. Call me Maurice, and tell me, what would you do differently? For the next hour, I outlined everything I'd seen in those leaked documents, explaining exactly how Mark's decisions were weakening the company. Maurice listened intently, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions that proved he understood exactly what I was talking about. You start Monday, he said finally. Junior executive position. Prove yourself, and we'll talk about more. 3 months later, I was staying late at the office when I overheard voices from the conference room. Swanson Technologies lost another major contract. someone said. Third one this quarter. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. Mark's getting desperate, another voice added. Word is, he's trying to arrange a merger with Pacific Solutions to stay afloat. My heart raced. Pacific Solutions was notorious for gutting companies and selling them for parts. I pulled out my phone and texted Elena. Need you to dig into Pacific Solutions. Anything you can find. Elena, a financial journalist, replied instantly. Already on it. Having drinks with Donald tomorrow. Mark's best man. He loves to talk when he's drunk. I smiled. Elena had always been brilliant at getting information out of people. The next morning, Maurice called me into his office. Your proposal for the Anderson account was exceptional. The board wants you to lead the presentation next week. Thank you, but you heard about Pacific Solutions. He finished, studying my face. News travels fast in this industry. I nodded. If Mark merges with them, everything my parents built will be destroyed. Then stop it. Maurice's voice was calm but firm. Show me what you can really do, Viviana. That evening, I met Rachel for dinner at our usual spot. The restaurant was quiet, perfect for sensitive conversations. Pacific Solutions. Rachel's fork clattered against her plate. He wouldn't dare. He would, I said, pushing my food around. He's desperate. The company's hemorrhaging money. Your father would be heartbroken. Rachel reached for her wine. When are you going to make your move? Soon, but I need more allies, more resources. My phone buzzed. Elena, you won't believe what Donald just told me. Call me ASAP. Excuse me, I said to Rachel, stepping outside to call Elena. Pacific Solutions isn't Mark's only option, Elena said, without preamble. Donald let slip that there's a board meeting next week. They're considering other buyers. Who? He wouldn't say, but he mentioned the Anderson contract. Apparently, Mark's counting on it to keep the company attractive to buyers. The same contract I was presenting to next week. The pieces started falling into place. Back inside, Rachel took one look at my face and knew. You've found something. Maybe. I took a deep breath. But I need to move carefully. One wrong step, and Mark will see me coming. He's too arrogant for that, Rachel said. He still thinks you're broken. Use that. Later that night, working late at Meridian, I noticed Maurice watching me from his office. He walked over, coffee in hand. The Anderson presentation isn't just about landing a client, is it? He asked. I met his gaze. No, it's not. Good. He set the coffee on my desk. Because I didn't hire you just for your expertise. I hired you because I recognize that look in your eyes. The look that says you're willing to do whatever it takes to win. Is that enough? It's a start. He turned to leave, then paused. Your brother's hosting a charity gala next weekend. Meridian just received an invitation. I think it's time we introduced his sister, the rising star of Meridian Tech, to our business partners, don't you? I smiled, already imagining Mark's face when he saw me there. I believe it is. The charity gala was being held at the same hotel where we'd celebrated my parents' last anniversary. Mark had chosen it deliberately, I was sure. He always did have a talent for twisting the knife. Ready? Elena adjusted my emerald dress in the hotel lobby. You look like $1 million. Make that 10 million, Maurice said, appearing beside us in an impeccable tuxedo. The investors will love you. I touched the diamond pendant at my neck, Mom's favorite, rescued from the house before Mark could claim it. Let's go make some new friends. The ballroom was packed with the city's business elite. I spotted Mark immediately, holding court near the stage, with his new fiancée, Gabriella, on his arm. He hadn't seen me yet. Viviana, Donald's voice boomed across the room. Mark's head snapped up, his champagne glass freezing halfway to his lips. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear before his practiced smile returned. Donald, I greeted Mark's best man warmly. How lovely to see you again. You know each other? Mark appeared at Donald's side, Gabriella in tow. We've met, I said sweetly. Donald's been very informative about the business lately. Donald, already tipsy, didn't catch the tension. Viviana's doing amazing things at Meridian. Did you know she landed the Anderson account? Mark's smile tightened. Did she? Actually, Maurice interrupted smoothly. Viviana's been instrumental in several of our recent successes. We're lucky to have her. How wonderful, Gabriella said genuinely, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent. Mark, you never mentioned your sister was so accomplished. There's a lot Mark doesn't mention, I said, locking eyes with my brother. Isn't there? Before he could respond, Elena appeared with an elderly gentleman in tow. Viviana, Mr. Patterson wants to discuss your proposals for technological integration in the healthcare sector. Excuse me, I said to Mark. Business calls. As I walked away, I heard Gabriella ask, Darling, why didn't you tell me Viviana was working for Meridian? The next hour was a blur of handshakes and strategic conversations. I worked the room exactly as Dad had taught us, making connections, dropping hints about Meridian's upcoming projects, watching potential investors' eyes light up with interest. You're a natural, Maurice murmured, appearing at my elbow with fresh champagne. 3 investors have already asked about private meetings. Make that 4, Rachel said, joining us. I just overheard the Thompson Group discussing how they might need to reconsider their existing partnerships. Their existing partnership with Mark, you mean? I took a sip of champagne, scanning the room. Where is he? Having an intense discussion with the board members by the bar, Elena reported, materializing with her journalist's notebook discreetly palmed. They don't look happy. I watched Mark gesture frantically, his usual composure cracking. One of the board members shook his head and walked away. Trouble in paradise, Maurice asked innocently. The Anderson contract was supposed to save him, I said. Without it, Viviana. Mark's voice was tight with controlled anger. He'd approached without me noticing. A word, I followed him to a quiet corner, aware of Elena and Rachel watching protectively. What are you playing at? He hissed. Playing? I'm working, Mark. Something you might want to try, instead of selling off pieces of Mom and Dad's legacy. His face reddened. You have no idea what it takes to run this company. No, you made sure of that when you changed their will while they were dying. I kept my voice low but sharp. How's that working out for you? I heard Pacific Solutions is interested in buying. Mark grabbed my arm. Stay out of this, Vivi. You're in over your head. Let go of my sister. Rachel's voice cut through the tension. She stood there, every inch the family matriarch, with Maurice and Elena flanking her. Mark released me, straightening his jacket. Family matters should stay in the family. You lost the right to talk about family, Rachel said coldly, the day you betrayed yours. As Mark stormed off, Elena touched my arm. You okay? Better than okay, I said, watching him return to his increasingly worried-looking board members. Donald just texted me. The board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Maurice smiled. Perfect timing. Shall we announce Meridian's new healthcare initiative? The one that just happened to be Mark's biggest potential growth sector. I nodded, straightening my mother's pendant. Time to twist the knife. Rachel squeezed my hand. Your parents would be proud. Not of the revenge, maybe, but of how brilliantly you fight. This isn't just about revenge anymore, I said, watching Gabriella console a visibly agitated Mark across the room. It's about justice, and it's just beginning. The morning after the gala, Elena burst into my office at Meridian without knocking. You're not going to believe this. I looked up from my laptop. The board meeting. Better. She tossed a USB drive onto my desk. Donald got drunk at brunch and left his laptop unlocked. Mark's been cooking the books for months. Maurice walked in just as I plugged in the drive. Close the door, I said. The files painted a damning picture. Mark had been inflating profits, hiding losses, and moving money between accounts to keep the company looking stable. This is exactly what we need, Maurice said, studying the screen. But we have to move carefully. One wrong step, and he could destroy evidence. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Mark just called. He's moving up the wedding. 2 weeks from now. He's panicking, Elena said, reading over my shoulder. trying to look stable for the investors, or trying to get married before everything falls apart, I added. Either way, we need to move faster. Maurice nodded. I'll call an executive meeting. It's time to discuss a hostile takeover. Wait, I held up my hand. I have a better idea. Donald mentioned something at the gala about Mark's private server. Elena's eyes lit up. The one with all the original company documents? Including, I said slowly, the real version of our parents' will. The next day, I met Donald for coffee. He was already seated when I arrived, nervously checking his phone. Thanks for meeting me, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. Mark's going crazy, trying to find out who accessed his private files. Donald wiped his brow. He doesn't suspect me yet, but you're worried he will, I finished. Help me, Donald. Help me prove what he did. Why should I? Because you were there. I leaned forward. You were at the hospital that day. You saw him with those lawyers while our parents were dying. Donald's hands shook as he lifted his coffee. He's my best friend. Is he? Or is he just the guy who's been using you to cover up his crimes? 3 hours later, I walked into Maurice's office with a signed statement from Donald and access codes to Mark's private server. You've been busy, Maurice said, impressed. I learned from the best. I sat down, pulling out my tablet. Now, about that takeover. The next week was a whirlwind of secret meetings and careful planning. Elena kept feeding false stories to other journalists, directing attention away from our real moves. Rachel worked her social connections, quietly swaying key investors. Then came the text I'd been waiting for. Wedding rehearsal dinner tonight. Mark insisted I invite you. Says it's time to heal the family. Gabriella, it's a trap, Elena said when I showed her. Of course it is, I smiled. That's what makes it perfect. The restaurant was exclusive, the kind of place Mark loved to flaunt his wealth. I arrived fashionably late, making sure everyone noticed my entrance. Viviana, Gabriella rushed to hug me. I'm so glad you came. Mark approached more slowly, champagne in hand. Sister, decided to accept the olive branch. How could I miss my only brother's wedding? I raised my glass. To new beginnings. Donald caught my eye from across the room, giving a subtle nod. The server was ours. Speech, someone called out. Let's hear from the best man. Donald stood, swaying slightly. I've known Mark for years. Been through everything with him, including, he paused, glancing at me. Some things I'm not proud of. Mark's face darkened. Donald. But tonight's about family, Donald continued. About truth, about doing what's right. My phone vibrated. A message from Maurice. Documents secured. Board members notified. Green light. I stood up, cutting off Donald's speech. Actually, I'd like to say something. The room fell silent. Mark's knuckles went white around his glass. Tomorrow morning, I said clearly, the board of Swanson Technologies will receive proof of extensive financial fraud. They'll also receive the original version of our parents' will, the one Mark replaced while they were dying. Gasps filled the room. Gabriella's hand flew to her mouth. You have no proof, Mark snarled. Check your private server, I suggested. Oh wait, you can't. The authorities already have. The sound of breaking glass echoed as Mark's champagne flute shattered in his grip. You're bluffing, he whispered. I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. His face went pale. The real question, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, is whether your lovely bride wants to be married to a man who's about to be charged with fraud and theft. As chaos erupted around us, I caught Rachel's proud smile from across the room. The game wasn't over, but I'd just made my winning move. The morning after the rehearsal dinner bombshell, I sat in Maurice's office, watching the chaos unfold on multiple news channels. Mark's fraud was front-page news, and Gabriella's family had publicly withdrawn their investment. Your brother's outside, Maurice's assistant announced through the intercom. Send him in. I straightened in my chair as Mark burst through the door, looking like he hadn't slept. Fix this, he demanded. Fix what? I kept my voice calm. The fraud you committed, the will you forged, or the mess you've made of our parents' company. You don't understand. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair. I had to take control. You weren't ready. That wasn't your decision to make. I'll give you anything you want, he pleaded. Name your price. The door opened again. Maurice walked in with Elena and two men in suits. Mr. Swanson, one of the men said, I'm from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need you to come with us. As they led Mark away, Elena handed me a tablet. The board just voted. They're removing him as CEO, effective immediately. And? I asked, knowing there was more. And they're considering Meridian's offer for a merger. Maurice smiled. With you at the helm of both companies. My phone rang. Rachel. Turn on channel 7, she said, without greeting. Gabriella's giving a press conference. I grabbed the remote, switching screens. Gabriella stood at a podium, her engagement ring noticeably absent. While I care deeply for Mark, she was saying, I cannot and will not be associated with someone who would betray their own family and commit fraud. The wedding is off. That's gotta hurt, Elena muttered. Not as much as this will, I said, pulling up an email. Donald just sent over the footage from Dad's office the day they died. Security cameras caught everything. We watched in silence as the video played. Mark ushering lawyers in through the back door, signing documents while our parents lay unconscious in the hospital. Release it, Maurice advised. End this completely. Wait, I stared at the screen. There's something else we can do. That afternoon, I walked into the boardroom of Swanson Technologies for the first time since Mark had taken over. The board members sat around the massive table, looking shell-shocked. Gentlemen, I began, you have two options. A messy public merger with Meridian that will drag this company's reputation through more mud, or a clean private transition of power back to its rightful heir. You have proof, the chairman asked, of the original will. I placed a folder on the table. I have everything. But I'm willing to keep the worst of it quiet if you do the right thing. And what's that? Restore the company to joint ownership between Mark and me, as our parents intended. But with one condition, I have sole executive control. The chairman leaned forward. And what happens to Mark? He keeps his shares, but steps down completely. No charges filed, no more public scandal. He gets to save face, and the company survives. Elena slipped into the room, handing me a note. I read it and smiled. Oh, and Mark agrees. He's signing the papers as we speak. The board members exchanged glances. All those in favor? The chairman asked. Hands raised unanimously. Later that evening, I sat in what had once been Dad's office and would soon be mine again. Rachel poured champagne into crystal glasses. Your parents would be proud, she said, handing me one. Though I'm surprised you let Mark keep his shares. Sometimes mercy is the better revenge, I replied. Besides, watching me run his company will be punishment enough. My phone buzzed. A text from Maurice. Merger announcement tomorrow. Ready to shock the business world? Elena walked in, carrying a stack of papers. The press is going crazy. Everyone wants to know how you did it. Let them wonder. I stood up, walking to the window. The city lights sparkled below, just as they had the night I'd gotten that mysterious phone call. We have work to do. Speaking of work, Elena said carefully, Donald's asking about that job you promised him. Head of security, I confirmed. He earned it. His evidence made this possible. Rachel raised her glass. To justice. To family, Elena added. I touched the diamond pendant at my neck, thinking of Mom and Dad. To legacy. As we drank, I noticed a small package on the desk, wrapped in familiar paper. The card read, You won. But remember, power comes with responsibility. Mark. Inside was Dad's old fountain pen, the one he'd used to sign every major contract. Well, I said, picking up the pen, shall we start fixing what he broke? The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I felt truly ready. 6 months after taking control of the company, I found myself staring at an unexpected email. Mark wanted to meet. It's a bad idea, Elena said when I told her. We were having lunch in my office. surrounded by stacks of merger paperwork. Probably, I agreed. But he's still my brother. He's still the man who betrayed you, she reminded me. My phone lit up with a text from Maurice. Board meeting in 10. Bring the quarterly reports. We'll finish this later, I told Elena, gathering my files. The boardroom was packed. Our merger with Meridian had exceeded all expectations, and today we were announcing another record quarter. The prodigal daughter delivers again, the chairman beamed as I presented the numbers. After the meeting, Rachel was waiting in my office. You're meeting him, aren't you? How did you? I'm having dinner with his ex-fiancée tonight, she explained. Gabriella mentioned he's been trying to make amends. I sank into my chair. What do you think he wants? Only one way to find out. The restaurant Mark chose was quiet, upscale, and neutral territory. He was already there when I arrived, looking thinner than I remembered. You look good, he said as I sat down. Success suits you. What do you want, Mark? He pulled out an envelope. To give you this. Inside was a letter, handwritten. I recognized Dad's writing immediately. Where did you get this? Found it in his desk drawer last week. It's dated 3 days before the accident. Mark's voice cracked slightly. Read it. The letter was addressed to both of us. My dearest children, if you're reading this, something has happened to your mother and me. The company is yours, both of yours. Together, you're stronger than either of you alone. Don't let pride or ambition destroy what we've built. Love, Dad. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, my hands shaking. Because I was wrong. Mark looked down at his untouched wine. I thought I was protecting our legacy, but I was just afraid. Afraid you'd be better at this than me. I am better at this than you. He actually smiled. Yes, you are. That's why I'm not contesting anything. You've earned this. Mark, let me finish. He held up his hand. I'm leaving the country. Starting fresh in London. But before I go, I needed you to know I'm sorry. For everything. My phone buzzed. A message from Donald. Emergency at the office. Server breach. Need you here now. I have to go. I stood up. There's a situation. Of course, Mark nodded. You're the boss now. At the office, I found Donald and our IT team huddled around monitors. Someone's trying to access the old private server, Donald explained. The one with the original documents, I finished. Can you trace it? Already did. He looked uncomfortable. It's coming from Pacific Solutions. My blood ran cold. I turned to Mark's old office, now mine, and froze. Through the glass walls, I could see someone at my computer. Call security, I whispered to Donald. But before he could move, Elena appeared beside us. Don't bother, look. On every screen in the office, documents were appearing. Proof that Pacific Solutions had been planning to strip our company for parts long before Mark's downfall. They were never going to save the company, I realized. They were going to destroy it. Check the trace again, Elena urged Donald. He typed rapidly. It's coming from Mark's laptop, in London. My phone buzzed with a text. Consider it my parting gift. Take care of our legacy. M. Rachel called moments later. Gabriella just told me something interesting. Pacific Solutions is scrambling. Someone leaked their entire acquisition strategy to the press. I looked at Dad's letter, still in my hand. Mark did one thing right, finally. What now? Donald asked. Now, I said. We do what Dad wanted. We build something stronger. Elena grinned. Together. Together. Later that night, alone in the office, I opened Dad's old desk drawer and found another surprise. A photo of Mark and me at our first company picnic, barely teenagers, both grinning proudly in matching company t-shirts. My phone lit up with one final text from Mark. You were always the better choice. Make them proud. I placed the photo next to Dad's letter and our latest quarterly report. The past and present, side by side. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now I had peace. And sometimes, that's better than revenge. 1 year to the day after taking control of the company, I stood in the lobby watching workers install the new sign. Swanson Meridian Technologies. The merged companies, stronger than ever, just as Dad had wanted. Quite a view, Maurice said, joining me. But we have a situation upstairs. In the conference room, Elena and Donald waited with grim faces. Pacific Solutions is making moves again, Elena announced. They're targeting Mark's London operations. What? I leaned forward. Why? Revenge, Donald said, pulling up emails on the screen. They're still bitter about the leaked documents. They want to destroy everything connected to the Swanson name. My phone rang. Rachel. Turn on the financial news, now. The television flickered to life, showing Mark at a press conference in London. He looked tired, but determined. Yes, Pacific Solutions is attempting a hostile takeover, he was saying. But they've underestimated the strength of family. The camera panned to show the London Stock Exchange ticker. Pacific Solutions stock was plummeting. What did you do? I whispered at the screen. My answer came in the form of an email from Mark. Remember Dad's old contingency plans? I implemented them all. Pacific Solutions just tried to buy a shell company. They'll be bankrupt by morning. He protected us, Elena said, amazed. He actually protected the company. Both companies, Maurice corrected. The London branch and ours are still legally connected. If Pacific Solutions had succeeded, they would have had a backdoor to everything we've built, I finished. Donald's computer chimed. Incoming video call from London. Mark's face appeared on the screen, the London skyline behind him. Hello, sister. I assume you've seen the news. Why didn't you tell me they were coming after you? Because you would have tried to help. He smiled sadly. I needed to do this myself, to prove I could protect our legacy instead of destroying it. The contingency plans, I said. You remembered them all this time? Dad drilled them into us every Sunday dinner for years. Always have a backup plan, he'd say. Always protect the family business. Rachel burst into the room. Pacific Solutions just announced emergency restructuring. Their CEO resigned. Perfect timing, Mark said. Check your email, Vivi. I opened his message to find documents transferring his remaining shares to me. Mark? No. Yes, he interrupted. The company belongs with you. I'm starting fresh, building something new, something Dad would be proud of. He'd be proud of you right now, I said softly. Perhaps. Mark looked away for a moment. I have to go. Board meeting to attend. My last one. After he disconnected, Maurice cleared his throat. The press will want a statement. Let them wait, Rachel said. Family comes first. I stared at the share transfer documents, remembering all the Sunday dinners, all Dad's lessons, all the years Mark and I had spent learning the business together. Donald, I said suddenly, can you pull up the original company charter? He typed quickly. Here it is. Why? Look at Article 3. I pointed to the screen. About subsidiary companies. Elena leaned in. Any independently operated branch can maintain autonomous leadership while remaining under the parent company's protection. The London office, Maurice realized. You're going to let him keep running it. As a subsidiary, I confirmed, already drafting the paperwork. He proved himself today. Maybe it's time I proved something too. What's that? Rachel asked. That forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger. I called Mark back. When his face appeared, he looked surprised. The shares, I said. I'm not accepting them, but I am offering you a deal. By sunset, the papers were signed. Mark would retain control of the London operations as a subsidiary, while I maintained oversight of the global company. Pacific Solutions was finished, and our parents' legacy was secure. To new beginnings, Elena raised her glass in my office later that night. To family, Rachel added. To forgiveness, I said, touching Mom's pendant. My phone lit up with a final message from Mark. Sunday dinner next time I'm in town. I smiled, remembering Dad's voice. Always protect the family business. Yes, I typed back. We have a lot of catching up to do. Outside my office window, the new company sign glowed in the darkness, a beacon of everything we'd lost and found again. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't in revenge, but in redemption. Maurice appeared in my doorway, ready for tomorrow's challenges. More than ready, I said, standing up. We have a legacy to build. The autumn wind rustled through the cemetery as I placed fresh flowers on my parents' grave. The marble headstone gleamed in the morning light, recently cleaned and restored. I thought I'd find you here. Mark's voice came from behind me. I turned to see my brother, looking more like himself than he had in years. Your flight got in early. Couldn't sleep on the plane. He placed his own bouquet next to mine. Too busy thinking about today. Today marked the official global merger celebration of Swanson Meridian Technologies. Both branches, London and domestic, operating in perfect sync at last. They'd be proud, I said, touching the headstone. Of both of us. Of you? Definitely. Mark straightened his tie. I'm still working on earning it back. My phone buzzed. Elena, everything's ready at the venue. Maurice is keeping the press entertained. We should go, I said. Rachel will kill us if we're late. At the convention center, the atmosphere crackled with excitement. Hundreds of employees, investors, and media representatives filled the main hall. There you are, Rachel hurried over. Donald's about to start the presentation. On the massive screen, images flashed, showing the company's journey, from our parents' first small office to the global enterprise it had become. Ready for this? Mark whispered, as we waited backstage. Are you? He smiled, a real smile, like when we were kids. Actually, yes. Donald's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome our CEO, Viviana, and the head of our London operations, Mark. The applause was deafening as we walked out together. A year ago, I began, this company nearly fell apart. Today we're stronger than ever. Because we remembered what matters most, Mark added. Family, legacy, trust. Maurice joined us on stage, carrying a familiar wooden box. Inside was Dad's old fountain pen, the one that had signed the original company documents. Today, I announced, we're not just celebrating a merger, we're celebrating a reunion. Mark opened a leather folder, revealing new partnership documents. From this day forward, all major decisions will require both signatures, London and domestic, just as our parents intended. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed. When Mark took his turn, his hands were steady. There's one more thing, I said into the microphone. We're establishing the Swanson Foundation for Business Ethics, ensuring that what happened to our family never happens to another. Elena appeared with another document, the Foundation's charter. The first board meeting is next week, she said. Gabriella agreed to serve as chairwoman. Mark's eyebrows shot up. My ex-fiancée. Who better to oversee ethical business practices? I grinned. She's got experience spotting red flags. The laughter from the audience broke any remaining tension. Later, at the celebration dinner, Rachel raised her glass. To second chances, and to lessons learned, Maurice added. Donald, slightly tipsy, chimed in. To the best revenge story that ended up not being about revenge at all. I caught Mark's eye across the table. He nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. Actually, I said, standing up, I have one last surprise. I nodded to Elena, who dimmed the lights. On the restaurant's wall, a projector flickered to life, showing a video I'd discovered in Dad's old files. To my children, Dad's voice filled the room. If you're watching this, you've either succeeded brilliantly or failed spectacularly. Either way, remember, business is business, but family is everything. Mark's hand found mine in the darkness. We got there eventually, he whispered. Better late than never. The video ended with Mom and Dad smiling at the camera, young and hopeful, standing in front of their first office. As the lights came up, I saw tears in Rachel's eyes. They'd be so happy right now. They are, I said, touching my mother's pendant. Somewhere. Morris raised his glass one final time. To the future of Swanson Meridian Technologies. No, Mark and I said simultaneously. We looked at each other, surprised, then laughed. To family, we corrected together. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove ourselves worthy of our parents' legacy. But tonight, watching Mark chat easily with our old friends, seeing the pride in Rachel's eyes, feeling the weight of Mom's pendant against my heart, I knew we'd finally found our way home. Sometimes the best endings aren't about winning or losing. They're about finding what was lost and building something stronger from the pieces.
I stepped through the front door, my heart heavy with worries about my son Jake and his family. As I entered the living room, I froze at the sight before me. My husband Doug had our 8-year-old grandson Caleb pinned against the wall, his face contorted with rage. "Where's the money, you little thief?" Doug snarled, shaking Caleb roughly. "I know you stole it from my wallet." Caleb sobbed, his face streaked with tears. "I didn't take anything, Grandpa. I swear." "Doug, what are you doing?" I cried out, rushing over to pull him away from Caleb. "Have you lost your mind? He's just a child." Doug released his grip on Caleb, who ran to me and buried his face against my legs, trembling. I wrapped my arms around him protectively, shocked by my husband's uncharacteristic outburst. "Money's missing from my office," Doug said gruffly, avoiding my accusing stare, "and this little brat was snooping around in there earlier." "That doesn't mean Caleb took anything," I said firmly, stroking our grandson's hair to soothe him. "You know he would never steal from us." Doug's jaw clenched. "Well, the money didn't just disappear on its own. Someone in this house is a thief." My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of the situation. Jake and his wife Amber had always seemed like the perfect couple, doting parents to Caleb. What could have driven one of them to steal from us? Just then, the front door opened and Amber walked in, her pretty face etched with worry. "What's going on?" I heard shouting. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, Doug's furious expression, Caleb clinging to me and crying. I saw a flicker of fear cross her features before she masked it. "Doug, I need to talk to you," Amber said, her voice shaking slightly. "In private. It's important." I tensed, sensing that whatever she had to say would be the key to unraveling this painful mystery. After settling Caleb in the kitchen with a snack, I followed Doug and Amber to the back patio, bracing myself for the truth. Amber took a deep breath, twisting her hands nervously. "I know what happened to the missing money," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "It was me. I took it." Doug exploded. "You lying, thieving." "Let her explain," I cut him off sharply before turning to Amber. "Why would you do this? Steal from your own family?" She broke down, sobs racking her slender frame. "I'm so sorry," Amber choked out. "I never meant for it to go this far, but I'm in trouble, deep trouble." The story came out between gasping breaths and fresh tears. Amber had been hiding a serious gambling addiction, racking up massive debts in secret. Desperate to get money to pay off her bookies before Jake found out, she had resorted to pilfering cash from Doug's office for months. "Please, you can't tell Jake," she begged us. "It will destroy our marriage. I'll get help, I swear. Just give me a chance to make this right." I looked at Doug, seeing my own shock and disappointment mirrored in his eyes. Our once perfect family was crumbling before us, torn apart by Amber's deceit. Could we really keep such a devastating secret from our own son? My heart ached as I realized the impossible choice that lay ahead. No matter what we did next, someone would get hurt, and the scars left behind may never fully heal. The weight of Amber's confession hung heavy in the air as Doug and I sat across from her at the kitchen table. Her once carefully applied makeup was now smeared from crying, her eyes red and puffy. "How could you do this to Jake?" "To Caleb?" I asked, my voice thick with disappointment. "Your gambling addiction has put your entire family at risk." Amber flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I never meant for it to get this bad." "But," she whispered, "at first it was just a little money here and there. But then I started losing more than I could afford." Doug slammed his fist on the table, making us both jump. "And you thought stealing from me was the answer? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" "I'm sorry," Amber sobbed. "I was desperate. The bookies were threatening me, saying they'd come after Jake and Caleb if I didn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine at the thought of my son and grandson in danger because of Amber's reckless behavior. How had she let things spiral so far out of control? "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. Amber hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. $50,000, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Doug let out a low whistle. Jesus Christ, Amber, that's more than Jake makes in a year. How the hell are you going to pay that back? I don't know, she said miserably. But I have to try. I can't let Jake find out about this. It would destroy him. I felt a flare of anger at her words. You should have thought of that before you started gambling away your family's future, I snapped. Amber's shoulders shook with fresh sobs. I know, but please, Tina. Doug, you can't tell Jake. I'm begging you. I exchanged a long look with my husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. As much as we wanted to protect our son from the truth, we both knew that keeping Amber's secret would only make things worse in the long run. We can't lie to Jake, I said firmly. He deserves to know what's going on. Amber's face crumpled. Please, just give me a chance to fix this on my own. I'll do whatever it takes, get a second job, sell some of my things. I'll make it right, I swear. Doug shook his head. And what happens when the bookies come knocking on Jake's door demanding their money? Are you going to put your husband and child in danger to cover your own ass? No, of course not, Amber cried. I would never let that happen. But if Jake finds out, he'll leave me. I can't lose my family over this. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite my anger and disappointment. Addiction was a terrible disease, one that could make even the most loving person behave in unthinkable ways. You need help, Amber, I said gently. Professional help, and you need to come clean to Jake before things get any worse. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. I'm so scared, she whispered. What if he can't forgive me? I reached across the table to take her hand, feeling the tremors that ran through her. Jake loves you, I reminded her, but he deserves the truth, and you deserve the chance to get better, for yourself and for your family. Amber took a shuddering breath, then nodded slowly. You're right, she said, her voice small but determined. I'll tell him everything tonight, and I'll get help. I promise. As I watched her walk out the door, shoulders slumped in defeat, I could only hope that it wasn't too late for her, or for the family she had so nearly destroyed with her lies. The sound of the front door slamming jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2:37 a.m. My heart sank as I heard Jake's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, knowing that Amber must have finally confessed her gambling addiction to him. I pulled on my robe and hurried out into the hallway, nearly colliding with Doug. We exchanged a worried look before Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. Did you know? He demanded, his voice shaking. Did you know about Amber's gambling problem? I hesitated, not wanting to lie to my son, but also reluctant to admit the truth. She told us earlier today, I said carefully. We encouraged her to come clean to you. Jake let out a harsh laugh. Well, she certainly did that, right after I found a letter from some bookie threatening to break my kneecaps if she didn't pay up. Doug sucked in a sharp breath. Jesus, Jake, I'm so sorry. We had no idea it had gotten that bad. Bad? Jake echoed incredulously. It's a fucking disaster. My wife has been lying to me for months, stealing money from her own family to feed her addiction. And now we're in debt up to our eyeballs with no way out. I reached out to touch his arm, but he jerked away from me. Jake, please. Amber needs help. She's sick. She's a liar and a thief, he spat. I don't even know who she is anymore. The venom in his voice made me flinch. I had never seen my son so angry, so hurt. It broke my heart to think of the pain Amber had caused him. What are you going to do? Doug asked quietly. Jake ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know, he admitted. Wish if quiet part of me wants to walk away and never look back, but we have Caleb to think about. At the mention of their son, I felt a surge of protectiveness. You can't let Amber's mistakes tear your family apart, I urged. Caleb needs both of his parents. Does he? Jake asked bitterly. Does he need a mother who lies and steals and puts her own selfish desires above her family's well-being? I opened my mouth to argue, but Doug cut me off with a sharp look. That's not your decision to make, Tina, he said firmly. Jake and Amber need to work this out for themselves. Jake nodded, his jaw clenched tight. I need some time to think, he said. I can't even look at her right now without wanting to scream. Why don't you stay here tonight? I offered. Give yourself some space to clear your head. For a moment I thought he might refuse, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Yeah, okay, he agreed. Thanks, Mom. As I watched him disappear into the guest room, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I wanted so badly to fix this for him, to take away his pain and anger. But I knew that this was a battle he would have to fight on his own. I turned to Doug, seeing the same worry and frustration etched on his face. What are we going to do? I asked softly. He sighed heavily. We support them, he said, both of them, and we pray like hell that they find a way through this mess. I nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult for Jake and Amber, but I also knew that as a family, we would face it together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The tension in the air was palpable as Doug and I sat across from Jake at the kitchen table the next morning. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. I pushed a mug of coffee towards him, but he ignored it, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Have you heard from Amber? I asked gently, breaking the heavy silence. Jake shook his head. No, and I don't want to. Not until I've figured out what I'm going to do. Doug leaned forward, his expression grim. I know you're hurting, son, but you need to think about Caleb in all this. He needs his mother? Does he? Jake asked bitterly. What kind of mother lies and steals from her own family? What kind of example is that setting for him? I flinched at the harshness in his voice. Jake, addiction is a disease. Amber needs help, not condemnation. She should have thought of that before she started gambling away our future, he snapped. Before she put our son at risk with her selfish behavior. Doug's face darkened. I agree. Amber's actions are inexcusable, and if it were up to me, I'd say you should cut her loose and never look back. Doug, I gasped, shocked by his callousness. How can you say that? She's your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandson. He shrugged, unmoved. She stopped being family the moment she betrayed Jake's trust. As far as I'm concerned, he owes her nothing. Jake looked torn, his eyes darting between us. I don't know what to do, he admitted. I love Amber, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again. And Caleb, he needs stability, not a mother who could relapse at any moment. So fight for custody, Doug urged. Get a good lawyer and make sure Amber never has the chance to hurt Caleb again. I stared at my husband in disbelief. How could he be so cold, so unforgiving? Yes, Amber had made a terrible mistake, but she was still a part of our family, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her completely. Please, Jake, I begged, don't make any rash decisions. Amber is getting help. She's trying to make things right. He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. I don't know if I can forgive her, Mom. Not after everything she's done. At least give her a chance to explain, I pleaded. Hear her out before you do anything drastic. For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then finally he nodded. Fine, I'll talk to her, but I'm not making any promises. Relief washed over me, even as Doug shot me a disapproving look. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult for all of us, but I couldn't give up on Amber, not when she needed us most. As Jake left to go confront his wife, I turned to Doug, my eyes narrowed. How could you be so cruel? I demanded. Amber is family. We can't just turn our backs on her. She stopped being family the moment she betrayed us, he said coldly. And if Jake has any sense, he'll cut her out of his life for good. I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger and disappointment. I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be so heartless, I said. Amber needs our support, not our condemnation. Doug's face hardened. She needs to face the consequences of her actions. And if that means losing her husband and son, then so be it. As he stalked out of the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. I had always known my husband to be a stern man, but never cruel. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if I even recognized the person he had become, or if our family would ever be the same again. The days following Jake and Amber's confrontation were tense and uncomfortable. My son had agreed to give his wife one more chance, but the trust between them had been shattered. I could see the strain on both their faces, the way they avoided each other's eyes and spoke in clipped, formal tones. I tried my best to be supportive, offering to watch Caleb so they could have time to talk things through. But every time I brought up the subject of Amber's addiction, Jake would shut down, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed anger. It was during one of these conversations that I made a shocking discovery. I was tidying up Doug's home office, sorting through the piles of paperwork that had accumulated on his desk, when I stumbled across a series of bank statements. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough, but as I looked closer, I felt my blood run cold. There, in black and white, were a series of withdrawals from our joint savings account, thousands of dollars, all funneled into an account I didn't recognize. And the dates. They went back months, long before Amber's gambling addiction had come to light. With shaking hands, I confronted Doug that evening. "What is this?" I demanded, thrusting the statements at him. "Where has all this money been going?" For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then his expression hardened. "That's none of your concern, Tina. I'm handling it." "Handling what?" I pressed. "Doug, this is our money, our future. You can't just take it without telling me." He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. "Fine. If you must know, I've been giving Amber money to help pay off her debts." I stared at him in disbelief. "What? Why would you do that? We agreed to let Jake and Amber handle this on their own." "Because I don't trust her," Doug said bluntly. "I've been keeping tabs on her, making sure she's not falling back into old habits, and when I saw how much she owed, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Anger surged through me, hot and bright. "So you went behind my back? Behind Jake's back? Doug, how could you?" "I did what I had to do to protect our family," he snapped. "Amber's addiction has already caused enough damage. I won't let her drag us down with her." I shook my head, feeling sick to my stomach. "This isn't protection, Doug. It's enabling. You're not helping Amber. You're just making it easier for her to keep gambling." "That's not true," he argued. "I've been making her give me receipts, proof that she's using the money to pay off her debts. I'm keeping her accountable." "And what happens when Jake finds out?" I demanded. "What happens when he realizes that his own father has been lying to him, just like Amber has?" Doug's face paled. "He won't find out because you're not going to tell him." I let out a harsh laugh. "You really expect me to keep this a secret from our son? Doug, this is wrong. You know it is." "What's wrong is letting Amber destroy our family," he said coldly. "And if keeping this secret is what it takes to prevent that, then so be it." I stared at him, hardly recognizing the man I had married, the man I had loved for over 40 years. In that moment, I realized that Doug's obsession with controlling Amber had blinded him to the damage he was causing, and I knew that if I didn't put a stop to it, our family might never recover. "No," I said firmly. "I won't be a part of this, not anymore. Amber needs help, not more lies and deceit, and if you can't see that, then I don't know what else to say to you." As I turned and walked away, I felt a heaviness in my heart that I had never known before. I had always believed that Doug and I were a team, that we could face anything together, but now I wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty terrified me more than anything else. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. Doug and I barely spoke, the tension between us thick and suffocating. I threw myself into caring for Caleb, trying to provide some sense of normalcy for my grandson in the midst of all the chaos. But even that small comfort was shattered when Jake showed up at our door one evening, his face pale and drawn. "Amber's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "She left a note saying she couldn't take the pressure anymore, that she needed to get away and clear her head." My heart sank as I saw the pain in my son's eyes. "Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" He shook his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, she didn't say, but I think she might have relapsed. I found some new gambling receipts in her purse before she left." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. After everything we had been through, all the lies and betrayal, Amber had thrown away her second chance. And now my son and grandson were left to pick up the pieces. Over the next few days, I did my best to support Jake as he tried to track down his missing wife. He called every casino and racetrack in the area, hoping someone had seen her. But as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Amber, I could see the hope draining from his eyes. It was during one of these fruitless searches that I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Jake was on the phone with one of Amber's old gambling buddies, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "What do you mean? She's planning to leave the state. Where is she going?" he demanded. There was a pause, then Jake's face turned ashen. "She's taking Caleb with her?" "No way in hell. She can't do that. Not without my permission." My heart seized with fear as I realized the depths of Amber's desperation. She wasn't just running away from her problems anymore. She was trying to kidnap her own son. I knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't let Amber destroy Jake's life any more than she already had, and I certainly couldn't let her take Caleb away from the only stable home he had ever known. So I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I called the police and reported Amber's plans, telling them everything I knew about her gambling addiction and the threats she had made against my family. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, betraying my own daughter-in-law like that. But I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do. Caleb's safety had to come first, no matter what the cost. When the police arrived at Jake and Amber's house later that day, they found her in the midst of packing her bags, a confused and frightened Caleb by her side. She was arrested on the spot, charged with attempted kidnapping and child endangerment. I watched from the sidelines as they led her away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Jake stood nearby, his expression unreadable, as he held Caleb close. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice choked with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let her take Caleb away from you." For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then he turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "You did the right thing, Mom. I know it wasn't easy, but you protected Caleb. That's all that matters." As I watched the police car drive away, Amber's face pressed against the window in despair. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. She had brought this on herself with her lies and her selfish choices, and now she would face the consequences. But even as I tried to convince myself that justice had been served, I couldn't shake the feeling that our family would never be the same again. That the wounds Amber had inflicted might never fully heal. The days following Amber's arrest were a blur of police interviews, legal meetings, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Jake was a wreck, torn between his anger at his wife's betrayal and his fear for Caleb's well-being. I did my best to support him, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. It was during one of these tense discussions that I finally learned the full extent of Amber's plans. According to the police, she had been secretly funneling money into a private bank account for months, stockpiling cash for her eventual escape. And she had planned to take Caleb with her, fleeing the state and starting a new life somewhere far away from the consequences of her actions. The thought of losing my grandson forever made my blood run cold. I knew then that I had made the right decision in turning Amber in, no matter how much it hurt to betray her trust. But even as I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of guilt that plagued me. What if I had been too harsh on Amber? What if I had pushed her to this point with my constant criticism and judgment? These thoughts weighed heavily on my mind as I sat in the courtroom, watching as Amber was led in wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. She looked small and fragile, her once vibrant eyes now dull and lifeless. As the judge read out the charges against her, I saw a flicker of something in Amber's expression. Not remorse or regret, but a cold, calculating anger that made my skin crawl. And then, to my horror, she turned to face Jake and Caleb, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just cast me aside and move on with your lives? Well, think again." Jake recoiled as if he had been slapped, his face draining of color. Caleb whimpered and buried his face in his father's shoulder, too young to understand the cruel words being hurled at him. "I'll get out of here eventually." Amber continued, her eyes flashing with malice. "And when I do, I'll come for my son. I'll take him away from you, and you'll never see him again. That's a promise." The courtroom erupted into chaos, with the judge banging his gavel and ordering Amber to be removed from the room. But even as the bailiffs dragged her away, her words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched Jake try to comfort a sobbing Caleb. How could Amber be so cruel, so selfish? How could she threaten to take away the one thing that mattered most to her own child? In that moment, I knew that I had to do everything in my power to protect my grandson, to make sure that Amber never had the chance to hurt him again. So I made a vow, right then and there. I would fight for Caleb no matter what it took. I would make sure that he grew up in a safe and loving home, surrounded by people who truly cared for him. And as for Amber, well, she had made her choices. She had chosen her addiction over her family, her own selfish desires over the well-being of her child. And now she would have to live with the consequences. As I left the courtroom that day, my heart heavy with grief and anger, I knew that our family would never be the same again. But I also knew that we would survive this, somehow. We would pick up the pieces and move forward, one day at a time. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would be there for Jake and Caleb. Always. The years that followed Amber's sentencing were a time of healing and rebuilding for our family. Jake threw himself into his work, determined to provide a stable life for Caleb, and I did my best to be there for both of them, offering love and support whenever they needed it. But even as we tried to move forward, the specter of Amber's betrayal hung over us like a dark cloud. Caleb in particular struggled with the loss of his mother. He would often wake up crying in the middle of the night, calling out for her in his sleep. It broke my heart to see my grandson in so much pain, but I knew that we had made the right decision in cutting Amber out of our lives. She had proven time and again that she was not capable of being a good mother or a trustworthy partner. Still, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt whenever I thought about the role I had played in tearing our family apart. If I had been more understanding, more supportive of Amber's struggles, could things have turned out differently? These thoughts plagued me as I watched Jake and Caleb slowly rebuild their lives. Jake started dating again, eventually meeting a kind and loving woman named Sarah, who accepted Caleb as her own. And Caleb, with the help of therapy and a stable home life, began to thrive in school and make new friends. But even as our family healed and grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, that there was a piece of our hearts that would always belong to Amber, no matter how much we tried to forget her. It all came to a head one day when I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic. I stumbled across a photo album from Jake and Amber's wedding day, their smiling faces beaming up at me from the pages. As I flipped through the pictures, memories of happier times flooding back, I felt a sudden wave of emotion wash over me. Anger, sadness, regret, it all came rushing back in a tidal wave of grief. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the phone rang. It was Amber, calling from prison. She had been granted early release for good behavior and wanted to see Caleb. I felt my heart constrict with fear and anger as I listened to her plead her case. How dare she, after everything she had put us through? How could she possibly think that we would let her back into our lives? But as I listened to the desperation in her voice, the genuine remorse and longing, I felt something inside me soften. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. Maybe Amber had truly changed and was ready to be the mother Caleb deserved. I knew it was a risk. I knew that Jake would be furious with me for even considering it. But in that moment, I made a decision that would change all of our lives once again. I agreed to let Amber see Caleb, under strict supervision and with the understanding that she would have to prove herself worthy of a place in his life. It was a gamble, a leap of faith, but one that I felt compelled to take. As I hung up the phone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt and pain. But I also knew that if there was even a chance of bringing our family back together, of healing the wounds that had torn us apart, I had to try. For Caleb's sake, for Jake's sake, and for the sake of the love that had once bound us all together. And so, with a deep breath and a silent prayer, I prepared myself for the journey ahead. A journey of forgiveness, of second chances, and of the power of a mother's love to overcome even the darkest of betrayals. "You little home-wrecking bitch!" The venomous text from an unknown number glared at me from Clayton's phone screen. I felt like I had been punched in the gut as I read through the rest of the messages, each one more vile than the last. "You think you can just waltz in and replace my mom? You're nothing but a gold-digging whore." My hands began to tremble as the full weight of the words hit me. This had to be from Brielle, Clayton's daughter from his previous marriage, the one he spoke about so fondly, yet I had never met. "I'm going to make your life a living nightmare, you deceitful snake." Tears stung my eyes as I dropped the phone onto the coffee table, flooded with a toxic mixture of shock, hurt, and anger. How could a teenage girl I had never even met despise me with such vitriol? The front door opened and slammed shut as Clayton rushed in from work, briefcase in hand. "Leona, you home, babe?" I remained frozen on the couch, unable to find my voice to respond. Clayton rounded the corner into the living room, his expression shifting from bright smiles to knitted concern when he saw my distressed state. "Hey, what's wrong?" He immediately closed the distance between us, taking a seat by my side. I could only mutely point at his phone lying on the table. Clayton's brow furrowed in confusion as he scooped it up to inspect the screen. I watched as the color drained from his face while he read through the messages. "Oh, God," he muttered under his breath, dragging a hand down his face. "Brielle? Is that seriously from your daughter?" I demanded, the words finally finding their way out amidst my anger. "What the hell, Clayton? What did I ever do to her to deserve being called such horrible things?" Clayton opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, feeling an onslaught of pent-up emotions from the past few months bubbling over. I've been nothing but nice about her, despite how weird it is that my own stepchild has been kept a total secret from me. I defended you when my friends wondered why I hadn't met her yet, trusted that you had your reasons. But this is unacceptable. "Leona, please, just let me explain," Clayton pleaded, his eyes carrying a pained desperation. "Explain what?" "That your daughter seems to hate my guts for no good reason? That she's apparently been talking about me like this behind my back from the very beginning?" I could feel angry tears streaking down my cheeks as I met his remorseful gaze. If this is the way she really feels, then maybe we're making a huge mistake here. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. Clayton and I had only been married for 3 months, but Brielle's unexpected hostility called everything into question. As I searched my husband's face, I saw the torn anguish of a man caught between the wife he loved and the daughter who was supposed to be his pride and joy. Was this to be my new normal? A teenager's misguided hatred threatening to destroy my marriage before it even really began? A upwelling of dread knotted my stomach as I realized that this was like just the first salvo in what was shaping up to be a very long and painful battle. 2 weeks after the shocking text message revelation, the moment I had been dreading finally arrived. Brielle was coming to live with us. Clayton's ex-wife had gotten a job transfer out of state, forcing the teenage terror to shack up in our peaceful suburban home. I tried to remain optimistic as Clayton and I stood in the driveway, awaiting her arrival. Maybe those hateful texts had just been an angsty outburst, and she wouldn't be as bad in person. Clayton kept assuring me that she was basically a good kid, if a bit rough around the edges at times. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up to the curb, music blaring from the open windows. The driver's side door flung open and out stepped Brielle, somehow managing to make even casual attire look like a deliberate act of defiance. Dark eye makeup rimmed her scowling gaze as she looked from Clayton to me with undisguised disdain. My heart sank as I immediately recognized the depth of loathing in her eyes. The messages had been no exaggeration. "Hey, sweetie, it's so good to see you." Clayton started towards her with open arms, obvious affection shining through. Brielle recoiled away from his attempted embrace, scowling even deeper. Yeah, Dad. Can we just get this over with?" An uncomfortable silence hung in the air for a moment. Clayton shot me an awkward grimace before clearing his throat. "Well, you remember my wife Leona, right, honey? We've been really looking forward to you coming to stay with us for a while." Brielle fixed me with a cold look of disgust that sent a shiver down my spine. Unfortunately, yes, she's kind of hard to forget or ignore, since she swooped in to take advantage of you so fast after Mom left. My jaw dropped at the brazen accusation dripping with venom. "Excuse me? That is extremely uncalled for, young lady. I think you owe me an apology right this instant." "Ha! And she's self-righteous too. How charming," Brielle sneered with a mocking laugh, cutting off my outraged retort. "Trust me, Dad, this is going to be a real treat living with the wicked step-monster from hell." I felt Clayton tense beside me, finally shifting into disciplinary mode. "Brielle Elizabeth Coleman, you watch your mouth. That's no way to speak to Leona after everything she's done to welcome you here." Brielle rolled her eyes so hard it should have strained them. Whatever. I didn't ask for any of this welcome charade. I totally saw through this sham from day one. With a defiant toss of her hair, she stormed past us towards the house, shoving Clayton's reaching arm aside as he tried to stop her. The sound of her truck's driver's side door slamming shut made me flinch. My husband turned to me with a pained, apologetic look. "Leona, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into her lately." "Spare me," I spat out, feeling the bulwark of my self-control cracking under the verbal onslaught. "Your daughter is a vile, disrespectful little monster who seems determined to make both our lives miserable. And if you can't see that or don't plan to do anything about it, then we have an even bigger problem here." Whirling away from his stunned expression, I stormed into the house and up to the guest bedroom, fighting back angry tears streaking my cheeks. That girl was going to rue the day she decided to take me on. I would make sure of it. If this was how Brielle wanted to play, then game on. That sociopathic brat had just awoken a petty, vengeful side of me that would stop at nothing until she got her bitter attitude in check. One way or another, I was going to make that little monster respect me as the woman of this household. Even if I had to resort to devious, underhanded measures to do it, the gloves were officially off. Things only went from bad to worse after Brielle's dramatic arrival. Over the next few weeks, her behavior became increasingly unhinged and disruptive. She would blast music at all hours, leave messes everywhere, and routinely insult or disparage me to my face. Clayton tried to play referee, but nothing seemed to get through to his darling daughter. The worst incident happened when I was throwing a housewarming party with friends from my book club. I had spent days making sure every detail was perfect, from the decorations down to the inspired menu selections. This was my opportunity to make a good impression on the neighborhood wives who had initially been skeptical about my hasty marriage. Of course, Brielle saw fit to go out of her way to try sabotaging my big evening. It began with her stalking around the party in an obscenely skimpy outfit, guzzling beer and cursing up a storm right in front of my prim guests. Their expressions of shock and disgust were palpable as she made crude, inappropriate jokes at every opportunity. When I pulled her aside and firmly ordered Brielle to go to her room until the party was over, she loudly called me a stuck-up prude within earshot of everyone gathered. I felt my cheeks flaming red as the guests looked on in mortified silence. Finally reaching my limit, I threatened to call the police and have Brielle taken away if she refused to behave. That twisted smirk crossed her lips, the same one I had come to dread more than anything else. "Yeah, sure, you go ahead and do that," she sneered. "I'll just tell the nice officers all about how you slapped me around last week while drunk for no reason. They'll have to take your abusive ass to jail instead." It was a bald-faced lie, but there was no doubt in my mind Brielle would follow through on her threat. She had created the perfect scenario to make me look like a villain in front of everyone. Shaking with rage and humiliation, I watched helplessly as Brielle slinked off without another word. A couple of my friends began whispering and pointing, stealing furtive glances in my direction as the wretched drama unfolded. I could only wonder what kind of sordid gossip that evil girl had planted in their minds. The rest of the evening was nearly ruined for me. No matter how hard I tried to get back into hostess mode and act like nothing had happened, a dark pall had been cast over the festivities. My book club ladies kept their distance, offering me tight smiles and quickly changing the subject any time Brielle's behavior came up. Clayton finally arrived home when it was nearly over, oblivious to the chaos. His apologetic expression told me he had already gotten an earful from Brielle about her warped perspective of the night's events. I didn't even bother arguing with him when he pulled me aside with a grim look and insisted we talk it through. "She's out of control, absolutely out of control." I caught the other wives murmuring to her friend as the last remaining guests made their way out the door. They both cut their gazes sheepishly towards me, as if they had been caught talking behind my back. Something needed to be done about Brielle, that much was crystal clear. Her venomous campaign of terrorizing me had now bled over into tainting my entire social circle's view of me, too. She wouldn't stop until she had painted me as a wicked, abusive monster to everyone. But what options did I have? Every time I tried to discipline her, Brielle would twist the story to make me seem even worse. And Clayton was too distracted with work and blinded by fatherly love to see the true depths of his daughter's depravity. As if reading my chaotic thoughts, Brielle flashed me a poisonous smile from across the room and mouthed a single word: checkmate. The vicious brat thought she had already won, that I was beaten into submission. But something inside me hardened with firm resolution in that moment. If Brielle wanted an all-out war, then I would happily oblige. This was swiftly evolving into a case of kill or be killed within my own household. And I didn't intend to go down without an epic fight to defend what was rightfully mine. No matter how despicable I would have to become or what weapons of deception I was forced to unleash, I would not allow that malignant brat to take everything away from me. If scorched earth revenge was the only solution, then so be it. Brielle had severely underestimated just how far I was willing to go to obliterate her, and by the time I was through, she would regret ever crossing me and my castle. With each passing week, Brielle's vendetta against me only intensified. She seemed utterly determined to make my life as miserable as humanly possible through her unrelenting onslaught of psychological torment. It started with the little things, leaving disgusting messes for me to clean up, forgetting to relay important messages, practically shouting insults at me whenever Clayton wasn't around to witness it. Just enough to keep me constantly on edge, but not quite enough to provoke serious disciplinary action. Then she started getting bolder, like the time she maliciously let the air out of my car tires late at night before an important meeting I was supposed to drive to. Or the week she got a hold of my personal cell phone and sent crude, embarrassing texts to everyone in my contacts list, including my own parents. Clayton was almost never home to see the worst of it thanks to his increasingly demanding travel schedule for work. That brat is lucky he missed the meltdown when I discovered she had sold off my prized jewelry collection behind my back, claiming they were gaudy old relics she had just thrown out. Oh, how I wanted to strangle Brielle with my bare hands that day. Only the terrifying thought of making things even worse by losing total control stopped me. My wise old mother had called after one of Brielle's more vindictive stunts, sensing the desperation in my voice. "You have to be the bigger person here, no matter how cruel she acts," she had cautioned. "Stooping to her level will only make you lose this war in the end." But every fiber of my being yearned to lash out, to unshackle the torrent of primal rage burning in my chest. That sociopathic little C-word deserved to suffer as much anguish as she had put me through. If not for Clayton still being in denial about his precious Brielle's evil ways, maybe I could have pressed criminal charges or something. Lord knows I had compiled enough evidence by now of her demented behavior to lock her twisted ass up for years. No, this personal hell was starting to feel inescapable, like Brielle had me trapped in an airtight psychological prison with no way out. Some nights, I even caught myself pondering whether extreme measures were called for to break free, if permanently neutralizing the threat she posed was the only viable solution. I quickly banished those dark thoughts, not wanting to stray into territory I could never return from. There had to be a better way of handling Brielle, one that played more towards my intellectual strengths. Maybe I could somehow beat her at her own insidious game. It was during one of Clayton's fleeting visits home when the idea finally sparked in my mind. He was sitting on the couch looking drained after another week of constant business trips. Brielle had the TV blaring some inane reality show, clearly just to be obnoxious. "Could you please turn that down?" Clayton sighed, tiredly pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've got such a headache right now." Instead of complying, Brielle just rolled her eyes and deliberately raised the volume even higher, flashing me a mocking smirk as she did so. That insufferable, disrespectful look she always gave was like a red flag taunting a raging bull. "That's it, I've had enough," I declared, snatching the remote from Brielle's hands and switching off the TV entirely. She opened her mouth undoubtedly to unleash another scathing barrage of insults, but I cut her off. "No, you listen to me for once. Your behavior lately has been utterly deplorable, young lady. I'm putting my foot down. From now on, things are going to change around here. Understand? Brielle favored me with her most scathing glower yet. Oh yeah, and what exactly are you going to do about it, you miserable battle axe? My lips curled into a thin, devious smile as the perfect idea blossomed in my mind's eye. Just you wait, Brielle. You'll find out soon enough. I'm done playing nice and holding back. She wanted to see the monstrously petty lengths I could stoop. She wanted total war within this household. Fine, then. She was about to get her deepest, darkest wish. It was time to stop walking on eggshells and fight fire with hellfire itself. Gloves off, no more holding back. From here on out, Brielle had better be prepared for the unrelenting psychological onslaught I was ready to unleash. No more misses. Nice girl, Brielle was about to realize the fatal miscalculation she had made in waging this battle against me. By the time I was done, she would be a shattered, submissive wreck begging me for mercy. I was going to systematically dismantle her vindictive schemes, turning her own wicked methods against her until she had no choice but to accept defeat. One deliciously devious ploy at a time, the vicious games were only just beginning. That ungrateful little gargoyle was about to learn you do not mess with Leona. And just like that, the perfect opportunity to unleash the opening salvo of my sinister mind games fell into my lap. A historic winter storm was bearing down on our area, promising to bury us under multiple feet of snow. Schools and businesses started announcing closures days in advance to brace for the brunt of the freeze. Clayton had been slated to return home in time to ride out the blizzard with us, but of course his company prioritized him being on site for some last-minute contract negotiations in Chicago instead. I'm so sorry. It looks like I'm going to have to stay put here until the storm passes, he had told me over the phone, his voice laced with weary resignation. Brielle behaving herself okay for you? I glanced over to where his darling daughter was sprawled out on the living room couch, absent-mindedly flicking pieces of tortilla chip across the floor as she stared at her phone. Catching my smoldering glare, she flashed me a mocking sneer and pointedly crunched an entire mouthful of chips, spitting chunks of debris across the carpet. Oh yes, she's just been an absolute delight, as always, I responded through gritted teeth. Don't worry about us, babe. You just focus on doing what you need to do. I can handle things here until you get back. With the snow already starting to steadily accumulate outside, I knew this was my prime chance to put the first stage of my master plan into motion. I just needed to set the trap and lure Brielle right into it. After accidentally unplugging the Wi-Fi router and TV cable box, I hid away in my bedroom with my laptop and a walkie-talkie I picked up from the hardware store. Several hateful texts and slew of profanity-laced insults came bellowing through my door, demanding I fix the internet and television immediately. I responded in a sickeningly sweet tone over the walkie that I was so very sorry, but it looked like the storm must have knocked everything out until it passed over. Brielle's reaction was as explosive as I had hoped. Curse words and hurled objects echoed through the house as her temper tantrum reached deafening new levels. Finally, after nearly an hour of whining and shrieking threats of bodily harm, she seemed to resign herself to entertaining me during this internet blackout. Banging and clattering resonated down the hallway from the living room as she began concocting some fresh hell. Perfect. Time for phase 2. I crept towards the garage and picked up the old can of industrial-strength pepper spray I had stashed there for this occasion. Just a few well-aimed bursts throughout the living room and kitchen, concentrated around Brielle's little nest. The screams of agony and sputtering, hacking coughs music to my ears as the noxious fumes no doubt swirled around her in a scorching crimson haze. I could picture Brielle's eyes watering and burning, her throat convulsing as she gagged for clean air. What the hell is this? Oh God, I can't breathe, she wailed between anguished coughing fits. Leona, you crazy bitch, I'll kill you for this. Phase 3 was ready. I texted Clayton to let him know the storm must have disrupted the air quality systems, filling our home with exhaust fumes that were rapidly becoming dangerous. I tearfully begged him to send an emergency crew to come extract Brielle and take her somewhere safe, away from the toxic air. He promised to summon the fire department immediately. Of course, By the time they arrived on scene, the pepper spray's effects would have already started to wear off on Brielle, leaving only her streaming eyes and lingering raspy throat as evidence something had been amiss. But she was hysterical enough by that point to corroborate there had been contaminants leaking into the house, making it unsafe. Within the hour, I stood in the doorway watching with deep satisfaction as Brielle was loaded into an ambulance, still coughing and swearing vengeance against me through choked gasps. That miserable little wretch looked utterly pathetic, exactly the way I had envisioned when hatching this plan. Everything had gone perfectly. As the vehicles pulled away and the blizzard howled outside, I made my way back inside, alone at last in the eerie silence. A triumphant smile crept across my face as I imagined Brielle's outrage when she eventually realized her surroundings were not contaminated after all. That I had masterminded this whole scheme just to have her forcibly removed and trapped elsewhere. While she was stuck in the evacuation shelters, I would be free to focus on preparing the next, even more devastating psychological torment designed to shatter her spirit once and for all. The opening shots had been fired, the chess pieces moving into position. This was only the beginning of my merciless crusade to make Brielle's life a living nightmare of carefully calculated cruelty. The fun and games were just getting started. 3 agonizingly long days passed before Brielle was finally allowed to return home. I could only imagine the torrent of vitriol she must have unleashed upon being released from that shelter, berating the poor staff about the toxic leak that had turned out to be nothing. When she stalked through the front door, tracking slushy footprints across the foyer, the look of murderous fury blazing in her eyes was almost palpable. I greeted the seething hellion with a sugary sweet smile from my position on the living room couch. "Why, welcome home, sweetie. I was so worried about you having to stay cramped up in that evacuation center all this time." Brielle's hands clenched into trembling fists as she visibly fought to contain the torrent of rage boiling inside her. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low, quavering growl of barely restrained violence. "You think you're so goddamn clever, don't you? Pulling that deranged little stunt to get me thrown out during the storm. Whatever do you mean?" I countered with a dismissive laugh, feigning innocence even as my heart pounded with intoxicating adrenaline. "I simply did what any concerned and responsible adult would have in that situation to keep you safe." "Cut the bullshit act!" Brielle exploded, flecks of spittle flying as she shook with fury. "I know you orchestrated the whole thing, you twisted, manipulative witch." For a split second, a flicker of doubt lanced through me. Perhaps I had underestimated just how unhinged Brielle's mental state truly was and stirred something too dark and volatile. But before I could entertain those concerns further, the vicious words kept spewing from her lips. "You set me up and had me dragged away into some cold, crowded shelter filled with bums, drug addicts, and freaks? Do you have any idea the trauma and humiliation I endured because of your pathetic need to pull some mastermind power play?" Her chest heaved with sharp, ragged breaths as her building tirade devolved into a guttural scream of pure fury. "I swear to God, if you ever pull anything like that again, there won't be enough pieces left to bury." Bold words from such an entitled, insolent little maggot. Yet a part of me couldn't help but crave the unadulterated venom dripping from them. This was exactly the reaction I had been craving to witness with my own eyes. Brielle completely unraveled, dominance shattered, raw emotions scorching through her veins. Forget physical threats. It was her vulnerability in these moments that provided the ultimate high. My carefully orchestrated torture was beginning to shred away that bitch's prickly layers of arrogance and disdain, one anguished yelp at a time. "Oh, Brielle, you'd be wise to watch that temper of yours," I chided with a patronizing smirk. "Getting so worked up isn't at all becoming of a young lady." "Fuck you." The snarled retort nearly caused me to shiver with delight. Just a bit more goading, a few extra prods against her exposed nerve endings, and maybe she would finally snap entirely. Suddenly, an idea sparked in my mind. One last push to drive her right over the edge into full-fledged meltdown. Keeping my features carefully impassive, I rose from the couch and began strolling across the room, all while reaching into my pocket to extract a small object. Brielle immediately tensed further, fists clenched and body braced for an attack as she watched me approach with narrowed, hateful eyes. Yet, when I extended my hand towards her, she recoiled in surprise to find I was merely holding a voice recorder. With a flick of my thumb, I let the device's replay function burst to life, filling the crackling silence between us. Won't be enough pieces left to bury. Brielle's own shrieked threat echoed all around us, harsh and unmistakable, even as her expression contorted in shock and horror. A coldly triumphant smile curled across my lips. You hear that, you vicious little gargoyle? I have all the evidence I need of your murderous inclinations right here, safely preserved. So go ahead, make good on your psychotic ramblings and try to make a move against me. She opened her mouth, but I swiftly cut her off with a cruel chuckle. No? Nothing to say now that the tables are turned? That's what I thought. You're not quite as tough as you try to play off when you're the one left dangerously exposed. It was delicious to watch Brielle's face flush with impotent rage and humiliation as she realized her own malignant temper had been used to entrap her. The vicious, uncontrolled outburst rendered absolutely toothless by the mere flick of a switch. Basking in the surge of power, I pressed my advantage by leaning in close to deliver the final verbal barbs in a low growl. Consider this your one and only warning, little girl. Open that hateful, entitled mouth of yours to threaten me again, and Clayton will be getting an earful of this recording, along with a call to the police. So why don't you be a good brat and run along before I really lose my patience? Brielle's lips mashed into a thin, bloodless line as a muscle danced in her jaw, awash with seething yet trapped anger. All I could do was smile as I watched her turn on a booted heel and stalk away towards her bedroom, deflated and defeated. The first great victory was mine. She had just been driven home nice and hard, just how outmatched she truly was in this war. But far from sating my appetite for revenge, that fleeting taste of dominance left me ravenously hungry to completely shatter her pathetic bravado once and for all. This was just the opening parry of what promised to be an utterly brutal, drawn-out psychological beating. I would break her down piece by degrading piece until there was nothing left but a whimpering, broken shadow to scurry away from my mere presence. And she would have no one to blame for creating the torment, but her own vile conduct and disrespect that had sealed her torturous fate. Let the games continue, and may the cruelest bitch reign victorious. Clayton's return home was like a brewing storm front finally breaking. The tension crackling through the air over the past weeks reached a fever pitch, ready to erupt in a maelstrom of harsh truths. I had prepared myself for this inevitable confrontation by stockpiling an arsenal of damning evidence against Brielle. Every threatening text message, insulting voicemail, video clip of her belligerent meltdowns, it was all meticulously catalogued and primed to unleash upon his arrival. The vicious hostility simmering between Brielle and I was impossible to ignore as soon as Clayton walked through the door. He paused in the entryway, shoulders slumping wearily as he took in the potent atmosphere of silent fury. "Why does it feel like a war zone in here?" Brielle immediately opened her mouth, undoubtedly to spew forth a litany of twisted lies and manipulated half-truths about the torment I had been subjecting her to. But I swiftly cut her diatribe off before those poisonous words could do any further damage. "Save it, Brielle," I snapped, leveling an accusatory glare at the petulant brat still poised to launch into hysterics. "Your father's finally going to learn about the reality of your depraved conduct in this household. No more smoke and mirror games from you." Clayton's brow furrowed in obvious confusion and concern as I snatched up the thick file folder crammed with indisputable proof. With a defiant toss of my hair, I thrust the catalog of compiled evidence towards his chest, forcing him to reflexively take hold of it. "Take a good long look through there, dear husband, if you can stomach it. Maybe then you'll finally accept the harsh reality of what kind of toxic, abusive monster your precious little angel has been acting like towards me." "Leona? What is all this?" Clayton sighed, flipping through a few pages with a pained grimace. I could practically see his natural defensiveness already beginning to flare up in protection of his child. "Evidence!" I shot back fiercely. "Documented proof of the unrelenting torment your deranged offspring has been putting me through for months now." Brielle tried to protest, indignant sneers and scowls already contorting her features, but I swiftly rounded on her with bared fangs. Don't even try denying it, you miserable little wretch. I have everything right here. Recordings, videos, written transcripts, the entire ugly truth all laid bare at last. Just try and talk your way out of this with more of your sickening compulsive lies. Clayton's patience had clearly reached its limit. Snapping the folder shut, he fixed us both with a stern, commanding glare that immediately quelled the dueling outbursts. That is enough from both of you. Brielle, go wait in the other room while I try to make sense of this madness going on. And Leona, you too. I need a few minutes alone to process everything. Though incredulous frustration burned inside me at being temporarily dismissed, I bit back any protests and obeyed, not wishing to push him any further while I held the high ground. As I stalked out of the room, I noticed Brielle remained rooted in place, arms crossed defiantly. Did you not hear me? Clayton's raised voice carried an unmistakable air of authority none of us dared defy. I said, go wait and let me handle this. Brielle shot me one last withering glare of pure loathing before slinking off to the other room without a word. I couldn't resist a smug smile of satisfaction as I took up position just outside the doorway's earshot. It would be so delicious to hear Clayton righteously tearing into her after her reprehensible antics. The muted tones of his lecturing voice rumbled for nearly an hour, punctuated by her occasional terse interjections, quickly silenced. At one point, a particularly harsh bark of rebuke made me almost feel a twinge of pity for the scalding parental onslaught she was undoubtedly absorbing. Almost. For all the agony and humiliation Brielle's rained down on me, this verbal flaying would barely begin to equate fair retribution. She deserved far worse than just a censuring lecture, and once Clayton calmed down, perhaps I would be able to convince him she needed even harsher repercussions. Finally, the door creaked open, and Clayton reappeared looking utterly crestfallen and drained. His eyes swam with warring emotions, disappointment, anger, shame, as they settled wearily on me. Leona, I can't even begin to find the words to describe how sorry and appalled I am at the way Brielle has been behaving. This is utterly unacceptable conduct, and it ends right now. You believe me, then? I couldn't resist asking with bated breath. He nodded warily, pinching the bridge of his nose in evident dismay. Yes, I believe you, and we need to have a very serious discussion about getting that girl some intensive therapy. My heart fluttered victoriously, giddy waves of vindication and triumph crashing over me. So the hellspawn had been laid bare at last, her web of lies and deception shredded to reveal the remorseless truth. I had won. There was no more denying that fact after such an arduous battle. Yet as I watched Brielle emerge from the other room, eyes downcast and features radiating petulant defiance even after such a thorough dressing down, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense that this was far from over. Our gazes locked across the room, twin infernos of blistering hatred and resentment clashing with palpable force. For every ounce of my elation, she burned with even more bitter rage at having her toxic agenda dismantled so completely. This was meant to be the end, her ultimate comeuppance after so many transgressions. But staring into those merciless eyes, I felt an ominous chill trickle down my spine. Perhaps all I had really accomplished was to ignite an even fouler blaze yearning for its own vengeance. In the aftermath of that fateful confrontation, an uneasy truce settled over the household. Brielle seethed in sullen silence, no longer directing open hostilities my way, yet still radiating palpable resentment whenever we occupied the same space. For my part, I basked in the glow of hard-won vindication, savoring my triumph over her vile scheming. Clayton remained utterly dismayed by the entire messy situation, vacillating between disappointment in his daughter's unrepentant conduct and disappointment in himself as a father. Lengthy screaming matches punctuated by deafening silence became the new norm as he struggled to find a path forward. She needs professional help, Leona. This level of anger and acting out isn't normal. It's something deeper and more disturbed. I nodded in solemn agreement as we sat together one evening after another. Unsuccessful attempt at a family discussion had dissolved into explosive tirades. You're right. As much as I would love nothing more than to simply wash my hands of that malignant brat altogether, Enabling her toxic behavior any further isn't an option. Clayton sighed, features etched deep with weary resignation. I think it may be time to send her back to her mother's permanently. Get Brielle into an intensive program somewhere to get the help she so desperately needs before her issues metastasize even further. The balm of those words was soothing to my very soul, a chance to finally excise the poisonous influence from our lives once and for all. Yet I maintained a carefully impassive expression, not wanting to appear too eager. If you truly believe that's best, dear, then you have my full support. I want nothing more than to fix this fractured family, but your daughter's well-being has to take priority over everything. Thank you, he murmured, reaching over to give my hand an appreciative squeeze. Thank you for being so understanding through this whole torturous ordeal. I hope it's not too late for Brielle to find her way back from that dark path she started down. I forced a small, reassuring smile in return as that gnawing sense of victory blossomed in my chest. Soon, the waking nightmare would finally be over. Unsurprisingly, Brielle's reaction to the news about being sent away for treatment bordered on outright hostility. She ricocheted wildly between scathing insults, venomous threats, and desperate, pleading promises to behave, anything to cling to even a shred of control over the deteriorating situation. But Clayton's mind was made up, his patience and tolerance utterly depleted by her toxic conduct. Brielle's vindictive tantrums could no longer sway him. She had simply crossed one line too many, somewhere along the way. The day she was due to depart, a tense pall hung over the house. I couldn't quite conceal a slight satisfied smirk when she descended the stairs with her belongings in tow, glowering daggers in my direction. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, she hissed under her breath as we passed in the hallway. One of these days, you'll get yours. I arched an eyebrow but otherwise remained impassive, causing her eyes to narrow into hateful slits. No matter how tempting the prospect was to hurl a few final parting shots, it felt somehow beneath me at this late stage. The battle was over, and the victor decided. Any further cruelty now would simply be excessive. Brielle had been utterly routed, her own malignant machinations catalyzing a devastatingly permanent exit from our lives. Allowing her to slink off while clinging to even a shred of dignity felt like the most utterly galling punishment of all. Let her wretched, fragile ego be the final victim as karma rendered its ultimate verdict. At long last, the front door opened and she cast one final look over her shoulder at me. Pride and venom warred across her features as she opened her mouth, poised to unleash a torrent of hate, only for her expression to crumple as Clayton pulled her into an unexpected, bone-crushing embrace she seemed powerless against. "It's going to be okay, baby," he murmured into her ear, sounding dangerously close to tears himself. We're going to get you the help you need so you can finally heal. I'll make this right, I swear." For a precious fleeting moment, a tiny crack exposed the broken, anguished child still lurking behind Brielle's hardened facade. The thinnest glistening of tears welled in her eyes before she blinked them away, features hardening once more into a stoic mask of defiance and denial. With one final backwards glare of utter contempt directed squarely at me, Brielle finally allowed herself to be led towards the waiting car destined to carry her towards her court-appointed treatment program. Part of me wondered if this would finally break the cycle of hatred, or merely plant the seeds for all new conflicts yet to come. Only time would tell if her demons could truly be exorcised, if she stood any chance of one day emerging rehabilitated. But for now, all I cared about was the overwhelming relief of having that cancerous presence removed from our household at last. As the car pulled away, I felt Clayton's hand slip into mine and give a reassuring squeeze. A sad, weary smile tugged at the corner of his mouth when our eyes met, that unmistakable gratitude for the fresh start we had both sacrificed so much to seize radiating from his gaze. At long last, all the pain and torment had finally achieved its purpose. Our castle was ours again,